He turned his gaze towards Argos, assessing, just as I thought, Argos, you are the strongest warrior. Count Louvre, also the father of the defeated one lying on the ground, panicked and shouted, "No, Morgan, my son." He frantically pointed at Argos and ordered his troops, "Capture that old man, kill him immediately." Out of impatience and heartbreak for Morgan, the Count took up his sword himself and charged, saying, "Otherwise, I will take care of it myself." With his team of knights, Count Louvre aimed his sword at Argos, growling, "How dare you, how dare?" The Count's body trembled, uncertain whether it was from heartbreak or fear. He still gritted his teeth. "This peasant dares to do this to my son." Argos placed his hands on his hips and replied, "By law, a festival only ends with death." He pointed at Morgan's corpse as a witness. "Didn't your foolish, ugly son say that?" Argos scoffed. "You don't even follow the laws you set. It turns out nobility is nothing more than a bunch of ruffians." Offended like that, the Count could only utter the bluntest words. Shut up now. In this territory, I am the law." Suddenly, from behind the Count, a voice responded to him. "You've done enough." Eren had stepped down into the arena, his determined yet frightening gaze fixed on Count Louvre. Argos was slightly surprised to see Eren and asked, "You?" Count Louvre glared at him for interrupting his battle and appeared threatening. "What, you scoundrel? Do you want to protect him?" He raised his sword in a threatening manner. "Accomplices are punished like criminals. You want that?" In stark contrast to Count Louvre's panic, Eren remained unusually calm. "Are accomplices also criminals? Then you are a criminal too." Count Louvre was confused and asked, "What?" Eren firmly replied, "Regardless of your son's crimes, distorting the rules you set, and insulting and punishing those who uphold justice, a fool like you is not worthy to be the lord of this territory." Count Louvre shuddered in shock, still struggling to respond. "Ugly what?" He angrily shouted in Eren's face. "What do you know to say that? Who are you?" Eren opened his bright blue eyes. The aura behind him erupted, attacking Count Louvre. Both the Count and Argos were left speechless, their mouths agape. Count Louvre, upon sensing it, turned pale and wondered, "What is this? This terrifying aura?" The spectators were also taken by surprise, looking up at the scene before them and exclaiming, "What is that? Look, it's a dragon." The entire form of the dragon god became vividly visible in broad daylight. Eren introduced himself. "I am the contract holder of the White Dragon, Eren Pendragon." The White Dragon let out a roar of astonishment, asserting its authority. Upon hearing his name, everyone recognized him in unison, Eren Pendragon, one of the 5 great dukes of the kingdom in the flesh. Argos was completely astounded, exclaiming this. Eren's momentum completely overwhelmed Count Louvre, but the mouth of the villain always twitched, including Count Louvre. He sneered, "Ha ha, Eren Pendragon, you are merely borrowing the power of the dragon to threaten me. Bring your army here and I will fight you. Alice is one of the most powerful forces in this kingdom." In front of Eren and the White Dragon, Count Louvre boldly declared, "We are justice." Eren frowned and looked at him. "Did you not hear me, you fool? You are the sinner." Count Louvre was somewhat taken aback when Eren retracted the aura of the White Dragon. Eren took a deep breath and activated max volume. "People of the territory, listen to me. The reason the warrior Argos is made of this water is that Morgan Louvre has seduced countless women to murder them. He is the most disgusting sinner." Everyone listened in shock. "Ha! What?" Eren gestured with his cloak toward Argos, continuing, "And his daughter is his victim." Count Alice was startled, immediately jumping up and shouting, "What are you saying, you bastard? Don't blame me." He pointed his sword at Eren, asking in panic, "Where's the evidence? If there isn't any, you—" Eren spoke sternly, naming one, Ryan Dawson. Count Louvre fell silent upon hearing that name. Argos also seemed equally surprised. Eren looked up the audience and called out, "Knight of the Vera territory, under the leadership of Lady Alice, Baron Dawson, are you here?" In the crowd, a man slowly stood up before everyone's eyes. His face was blank, but there was no sign of fear or coercion. Eren looked at him and said, "The evidence is in his hands." Eren raised his eyes to the podium and easily spotted Dawson's figure standing out among the crowd. His expression turned angry. "Mr. Dawson, 2 summers ago, your daughter was murdered by Morgan Louvre." He shouted, "The price of your silence is the Vera territory. Is that correct?" He questioned Dawson. Count Louvre was terrified. "What? How could that be?" Dawson looked truly alone. He broke down in tears. I am the foolish father." He remembered his daughter, how 2 years ago his little girl was killed on a road in the countryside. Her eyes were still wide open, her lower body covered in blood. Dawson's body shook violently, his hands clenched into fists. In the girl's hands, he struggled to repeat the story. It was a gold button, exactly like the one Morgan Louvre wears. It bears the emblem of the Count. The audience gasped in horror. Dawson's face was filled with rage. "I was determined to reach the Count's castle, but I was caught by Morgan." He recalled the words he had said. At that moment, Morgan had cruelly threatened him. Either you go to my father's place now and keep quiet forever, or you keep your mouth shut and I will grant you some wealth. His gaze radiated a murderous intent that made others tremble in fear. Dawson bowed his head, his body still shaking, his hands clenched as if he was restraining something. Choose. Suddenly, he raised the gold button embossed with the Count's emblem and said, Here, this is the evidence. The gold button, engraved with a flower, sparkled in his hand. After seeing it, the whole audience jumped to their feet. An uproar of discussions erupted around. Is it real? But it is true that 2 years ago, Lord Dawson suddenly became a baron. Dawson held his face in pain and cried. Someone stepped forward to take the button and examine its authenticity. This gold button, it bears the emblem of the Count. Everyone in the audience rushed forward, competing to see, let us see, me too. The three of them, Leon, Eren, and Lindsay, looked bewildered at the crowd, resembling a disturbed hive. Is this the meaning of burying deep and sealing tight? Count Louver turned pale, falling to his knees on the ground, murmuring, No, it can't be. Argos was also taken aback by this situation. Ha ha, quite a surprise. He turned to Eren, but Pendragon, how did you know about this? Eren thought for a moment. He knew about this from his previous life. He quietly recalled, after you were captured, Sir Dawson came to visit to express his gratitude to you. He smiled, in my past life, you were the one who told me. Eren stepped towards the crumpled Count Louver. He calmly looked down at him. Everything is clear, disappear, you fool. Count Louver's body trembled. I will not forgive him. He tried to stand up. He has committed so many crimes. Not only treason, but also the murder of nobles. I will not spare you. He shouted angrily. The lives of commoners, how can they compare to the lives of nobles? The Lord brandished his sword, pointing it at Eren, a purple aura emanating from his body. Protecting a criminal like him is nothing less than treason. At his words, the purple aura surged and shot straight towards Eren. As the purple aura surrounded him, Eren simply smiled calmly. His expression was composed, then I have no choice but to fight against the Empire. Cal Louver did not expect him to say that. Eren looked directly at him. In this world, there is no place for a ruler who does not respect the lives of his subjects. Eren unleashed his dragon aura, his eyes shining with a sparkling golden light. Of course, including you. The dragon aura surged and completely overwhelmed Count Louver's purple aura. The dragon-shaped aura encircled him, causing him to turn pale with terror and cry out in fear. Eren drew his sword, the power of the white dragon manifesting. He swung the sword in his hand. The blue sword energy shot forward in an instant. The sword in the hand of Count Louver was too weak to withstand a single blow and shattered into many pieces. He looked on in horror, tears streaming down his face. Eren retracted the power of the white dragon, looking down arrogantly at the helpless Count Louver who sat there. Then he walked past him, saying, Your life is worthless. The knights of Count Louver held their swords, but no one dared to approach Eren. Argos had been quietly observing the scene all this time. Suddenly, he chased after Raven, praising, Well said, young man. Eren's expression was serious. You are the kind of person that I and this world need. Argos was taken aback. He stepped forward, walking beside Eren, smiling. I don't care whether you are a duke or not. I don't even know you. Argos looked directly at him. But I cannot disregard my benefactor. Hearing this, Eren smiled happily. Argos did not hold back and gave him a hearty pat on the back. The three Leons silently watched as Argos affectionately draped an arm around Eren as they walked. Eren exclaimed, Look at how well they get along. Lindsay agreed. It looks like, how should I put it? It looks like they've been side by side for a long time. Leon's eyes sparkled. The guys are really cool. Eren and Lindsay looked at him as if he were a fool. Then suddenly, a finger pointed straight at Leon's cheerful face. The owner of that finger was none other than Argos. Is this guy going to be my disciple? And so, Leon's days of rigorous training began. In the early morning, Argos leisurely drove the cart while Leon, tied with a black rein like a horse, struggled to keep up with their speed. He puffed on a cigarette, constantly watching Leon intently. This training method was too harsh, and Leon quickly exhausted, breathing heavily. Argos squinted. Then he raised the whip he was holding and struck Leon's back hard, causing him to cry out in anguish. Argos sternly lectured, Don't let yourself get winded like that. This will tire you out faster. In a real battle, beat like this means death. Learning how to breathe correctly is fundamental in the art of combat. Even though he was already very tired, Leon continued to run. Yes. However, Argos still seemed dissatisfied, continuing to whip Leon's back with the whip. He couldn't understand what was happening, only able to run while yelling in pain. The correct response should have been, Yes, sir, Argos calmly stated. Leon suddenly realized and hurriedly corrected himself. Yes, sir. Inside the carriage were Eren, and Lindsay. Eren still had a composed expression. but the two girls heard the conversation outside and silently sweated for Leon. Eren looked outside. Isn't his training a bit harsh? Lindsay also seemed worried. Is Leon going to be okay? I'm afraid something will happen to him. Eren saw this as entirely normal. As a teacher, his skills are undeniable, and Leon has the talent to learn his techniques. Outside, Leon was still pushing himself to run forward, but unfortunately, his foot suddenly tripped over a log lying across the road. Leon lost his balance, and his whole body slammed hard into the ground, the sound of his painful cries echoing everywhere. Argos was not worried at all and continued to teach Leon. You are not focused at all. On the battlefield, this is equivalent to death. The horses did not stop because Leon fell. They continued to run swiftly forward, due to the rope around him. Even though he fell, Leon was still dragged along the ground. Argos' voice continued to echo steadily. When we reach the Imperial capital, you will be able to practice against real opponents. Until then, embed these foundational skills into your body. Argos' eyes suddenly reveal a deadly intent. According to the Lord's orders, I have 3 months to train you. Now let's train until you drop. Poor Leon, besides crying out, he did not dare to object a word. Yes, yes, my lord. In the carriage, Eren and Lindsay turned to look at Eren simultaneously. Seeing him still calm, both girls thought in unison, this is really too brutal. At the Pendragon territory, Luda's surprised voice rang out, Ha! She was completely taken aback by the news she just heard. Is Eren involved in the death of the Count's illegitimate child, Morgan Louver? Vincent sat in the chair, calmly pouring a glass of wine. Yes, he confirmed and defended the person who committed that act. When he first heard this news, his reaction was the same as Luna's. At first, I was surprised too, but I listened to what happened. Vincent explained to her slowly, and it seems that a man named Morgan was an abuser of his own power, attacking and killing young girls, a true villain, and the one who killed him was a relative of one of his victims. Justice is on their side. Upon hearing this, Luna fell silent. Vincent savored the taste of the wine filling his mouth. However, he had paved the way for some opposing forces against the Pendragon family to act more freely than before. He thought to himself, his eyes did not deceive him. Vincent recalled Eren's determined face. Protecting him from slander and helping him become strong enough to rise as a true king was what he needed to do at this moment. He gradually became pensive, so he could protect the weak in this empire, as well as fulfill his long-standing desire. In a forest within the Pendragon territory, Elkin stood with his arms crossed, looking up at the knights riding Griffins training in the sky. Some were riding Griffons while wielding wooden spears, fighting against their opponents. Others were practicing archery while mounted. The arrows they shot were all accurate, hitting the target board. Elkin quietly observed everything. Vincent leisurely approached him with a glass of wine. It's truly marvelous, Sir Isla. Vincent stood shoulder to shoulder with Elkin, looking up at the sky as well. Griffin knights are our future, and with such progress, only the best knights will be able to meet the expectations. In Vincent's eyes, there was the image of a group of Griffin knights relentlessly training without pause, striving to produce countless powerful Griffin knights. He suddenly smiled, unreservedly praising Elkin. It must mean that the Griffins have been trained in a very systematic and strict manner. You are truly an outstanding leader. Elkin's face remained utterly expressionless throughout. Vincent, not noticing, casually asked, Can you do that? Elkin, indifferent and sparing with words, replied, No problem. Hearing that, Vincent's smile deepened. Truly reliable, I will assign you the responsibility for the strategic transport issue, because your strength is too great to be wasted on mundane tasks. Elkin did not respond, he just focused on watching the Griffin Knights training in the air. The atmosphere between the two became awkward for a moment. Vincent felt slightly embarrassed, sipping from his glass, thinking, does he still seem to hold a grudge against me since our battle? He glanced at Elkin, his mind swirling with thoughts, or maybe he is just a bit reserved. This strange silence was indeed uncomfortable. Time passed, and no one spoke. The only difference was that Elkin had another action, which was to stroke the head of the Griffin beside him. Just when Vincent could no longer stand this atmosphere, he finally heard Elkin's voice. Do you know where Sol has gone? Elkin asked as he stroked the Griffin while looking at Vincent. It seems Vincent did not expect him to ask that. Like the Lord, Vincent raised his glass to drink. They only leave the Principality when they need to address significant issues. Sol has now arrived at the Lobstein Prairie. She transformed into the shape of a white dragon, soaring through the sky with a wind-splitting speed. Sol paused at a canyon, looking down. Beneath the canyon was a layer of green mist enveloping the area. Sol flew down and touched the mist. A flash of bluish-white light erupted as the mist was pierced. Sol gently landed in her human form. She looked around exactly as Ray had described from his memories. Sol silently assessed that the Lobstein Prairie held an enormous amount of latent mana, a dragon vein. Looking at the swirling green mist surrounding her, Sol contemplated, if I establish my new den here, he might. Suddenly, Sol seemed to sense something. She abruptly interrupted her train of thought and looked up. Above the canyon, another black dragon appeared. Sol was slightly astonished. Black dragon. It was the black dragon Amalhalt. The whirlwind suddenly swirled, a strong purple aura emanating from the body of the black dragon. This aura enveloped Amalhalt, and the silhouette of the black dragon gradually disappeared within that aura, until with a bang, dazzling rays of light flashed. In the sky, amidst the streams of purple aura, a pair of legs suddenly appeared. Soon after, Amalhalt appeared in the form of a young man with black wings on his back. His expression was indifferent. "Why have you come here, O queen?" The two faced each other. On one side was a girl with white hair, pointed elf ears, and dragon wings, while on the other was a young man who seemed to belong to the same lineage, yet his appearance contrasted sharply with hers. The black wings rested on his body, and he had long hair that reached his shoulders. "Why are you here?" He looked at her with distant eyes. "Your Majesty." The white-haired girl replied gently. "Black dragon, Amalhalt, is this dragon vein yours?" she asked. The black dragon respectfully answered, "No, forgive me for hiding it. I only discovered it by chance a few years ago and did not inform you." The queen questioned, her tone neither hot nor cold, but it was evident that she was somewhat angry. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amalhalt continued calm as ever. "I just don't want the queen to be troubled by such useless information, especially after executing the Pendragon Pact. Her health is in great distress." The queen, somewhat unexpectedly, upon hearing this response, could find no fault in it. At this moment, the black dragon asked again, "But how did you know about this place?" He calmly continued, "After discovering this place, I witnessed the mana here go out of control twice. The first time was in the spring of this year, and the second time was when the queen made her vow to the Pendragon family. And that Pendragon, he not only possesses the aura of a dragon, but within his body, he also has the aura of a demon god." The queen's elegant brows furrowed. This spring couldn't have been the time when Rey was reborn as Eren Pendragon. Amalhalt interrupted her thoughts. "Throughout history, there has been either a successful vow or a permanent failure. I have never heard of any precedent. On that very day, the mana here went out of control." Then he said something unclear, "And today, the queen reappears here without me knowing anything." Amalhalt lowered his voice. "Could it be that you know something? The true identity of that Pendragon brat?" The queen frowned, her mood extremely complex, countless images flashing through her mind. After a moment, she stabilized her emotions, gently closing her eyes. Now is not the time. Amalhalt observed the continuously changing expressions on her face, silently exhaling, then flew into the air, leaving a reminder for the queen. The power of the demon god is something that can bring hell to this world. It will destroy and recreate another world. Our mission as the Dragon Clan is to observe every move of that Pendragon. The queen opened her mouth, her fierce spirit responding. "I know, however, that child was also chosen by me to be the contract bearer holding my soul. Never forget that, Black Dragon Amalhalt." The sunset spread across a vast expanse. Watching him leave, the strong expression from earlier disappear, replaced by a look of worry. She silently called out the name of the other, Rey. In another place, the people could not hide their surprise when they saw the scene before them and exclaimed, "What? What is that? Oh my gosh! There is a person with 2 horses pulling a cart over there." Leon ran alongside the horses pulling the cart. Even though his body was covered in sweat, he turned to stroke the horse's fur. "You must be working so hard to pull such a heavy cart over such a long distance." His master, with a cigarette in his mouth and holding a few walnuts in his hand, tossed a few toward Leon. The young man deftly dodged them all and turned to say to him, "Don't think I am clueless like those horses, master." Eren Pendragon, Lindsay, and Aron in the cart could not help but admire his talent. Aron praised Leon. "That's amazing." Her voice was broken as the speed of the cart was too fast for the wind to carry her words. Eren Pendragon glanced at the surroundings, thinking to himself, "More and more people are gathering, we must be getting close." At this moment, Leon suddenly pointed in one direction and shouted, Look over there, master, look there, young lord. It's the entrance to the royal city, the Wall of Glory." The 3 of them slowly got off the cart and looked at the scenery in front of them. Eren Pendragon couldn't help but be taken aback. These were the towering city walls standing before a river that was 5 miles wide, no, actually 10 miles. And on the bridge leading to the gate into the outskirts, there were countless people coming and going, looking like a swarm of ants. This was just the outskirts, but the population here might be equal to that of the Pendragon territory. In stark contrast to their joy and excitement, Argos, Leon's master, with a weary gaze, lit a cigarette and said, "What's so joyful about this? It's just a congested place." Leon smiled at him. "Master, don't worry." His attitude surprised him a bit. Leon pointed in a direction, "Because soon we will pass through that gate over there, the first gate." Eren Pendragon, Lindsay, and Eren then looked in the direction he pointed. The three were immediately taken aback. Eren exclaimed, "Not a single person there." As the carriage neared the gate, someone suddenly shouted, "Halt! Stop the carriage immediately." Everyone looked back to see three guards standing at the gate. The one in the middle shouted, "Only counts and above are allowed to pass through the first gate. This is a private entrance for royalty. Please use another gate to enter." The magnificent carriage came to a halt. Argos, with a tired expression, let out a sigh. "Hey, I don't know how to say this nicely." He then turned to Eren Pendragon, who was slowly getting down from the carriage. "Hey kid, come out here and talk to them." At that moment, suddenly a tune rang out, cutting through everything. The sound was not gentle or pleasant, but extremely loud, causing everyone to cover their ears. The gate slowly opened from within. Unable to bear it, Argos shouted, "What's with all the noise?" Leon then spoke up to explain. "Whenever there are princes or dukes from the Empire arriving, the horns will sound." As the gate opened, a lavish carriage appeared. The gate on the carriage swung open, and a person jumped down in front of Eren Pendragon. His outfit clearly indicated his noble status, and his voice was equally arrogant with a challenging demeanor. "You've always looked lively, Duke of the White Dragon, Eren Pendragon." "You're not one to be outdone," responding in turn. "Hey, you're still the same." First hearing the voice before seeing the person, Prince Anne. Suddenly, a pair of legs in red high heels stepped down, calling Eren. It was a girl with long hair tied in two pigtails, wearing a very demure black dress. She gently lifted her dress and greeted, "It has been a long time since I last saw you." Seeing her, Eren immediately asked, "Princess Ingrid?" She whispered, "This is our first time meeting after a long while." Upon hearing this, Eren let out eh. Then a cheerful girl waved and greeted Prince, making him turn to look. She was as excited as a child and said, "It is such an honor to see both of you again." At that moment, Prince Ian joyfully ran over like a child, exclaiming, "Wow, Miss Eren." He then happily took her hand and said, "You have become so beautiful after such a short time apart." This left Eren Pendragon feeling disheartened, unsure of what to say. In a magnificent royal house, a voice rose up. "This place is really noisy." Then a person smoking a cigar asked Leon, "Have they forgotten about us?" Seeing such scenes, Leon replied, "It seems so." In the splendid royal palace, where the light shone brightly, Ian held a glass of wine in his hand and asked, "Why have you become so reserved lately, Eren Pendragon?" At a large table where everyone was facing each other, Eren responded to the question, "You really look tired, Prince Ian." Upon hearing the answer, Ian seemed to be provoked, pointing and shouting, "It's your fault. No matter where you go, you always cause trouble." Then he cradled his head in frustration and complained, "You've caused trouble in Sissek and Alice. You have no idea how worried my sister has been. And because of that, even I." The girl beside him glanced shyly. With a serious expression, Eren Pendragon replied, "Duke, I'm just doing what needs to be done." This surprised Prince Ian and his sister greatly. Then he leaned on the table and said seriously, "Then the culprit you caught in Sissek is Love Tylene. I will tell the servant to bring him here." Hearing this, Prince Ian asked further, "Is that all right? What if he attacks here?" In response, Eren, holding the glass of wine, replied cheerfully, "You don't need to worry about that. My servant will handle him." With a serious expression, Ian said, "You currently have too many enemies, including the Count of Lura Alliance, and there's also the governor of Saguna. His power stretches across the empire." Eren Pendragon fell into silent contemplation, uncertain how to respond to Ian's words. Ian continued, "At this award ceremony, the Lindagor and Arangis families from the empire's 5 great duchies will also attend." Anne leaned forward seriously and said, "Eren Pendragon." Upon hearing this, suddenly stood up in surprise. "Arangis?" Eren asked. Anne rested his chin on his hand, looked away thoughtfully, and added, "The Duke of Han and the Sea Driving King have almost never appeared in the capital. Could it be that—" Eren, with a serious look, suggested, "Ian, can you help me with something?" Ian raised an eyebrow and asked, "What is it?" Eren replied, "I need you to gather the Empire's strongest knights." Nearby, Leon had just cracked a nut. He exclaimed happily, I did it, master. I can crack the nut now." This made the master, who was holding a cigar, turn to look. He brushed off his hands, handed another nut to Leon, and said, "This time, try cracking 3 at once." Hearing this, Leon flinched and asked, "What? What do you mean?" He remained calm as he turned to remember to finish it in 10 days. Leon was still frightened and replied, "Yes." Seeing him respond that way, the nearby servant thought, "That can't be a question, right?" Holding the nuts in his hands, his master gently crushed 5 of them and scattered them in front of him. Frightened, the young man heard him say, "A warrior without strong hands like a knight cannot ride a horse." Hearing this, Leon sadly replied, "Yes." Seeing this, the person next to him thought, "He has given up." Both Prince Ian and Eren Pendragon approached. Ian, standing at a distance, asked, Who are those two? Eren Pendragon replied. Leon and Argos, two warriors who have joined the Pendragon clan. Upon hearing this, Ian said, Argos, so that's him, the one who dealt with the strongest knight Alice. Seeing Leon, he asked, the other one seems familiar to me. He is a jester from the John Bull clan, right? Upon hearing this, Eren Pendragon frowned and said, he is no longer a jester. He now belongs to the Pendragon clan, a warrior. Then he crossed his arms and continued speaking. Even though he is still an apprentice, Ian, standing next to him, looked on without knowing what to say. Leon was trying to crush three nuts with all his strength, while the two of them were still discussing him, despite the fact that he was still training for the upcoming battle. Ian sighed, pondered for a moment, and then said, that is a high appraisal coming from you. Upon hearing that, Eren Pendragon shot him a glance. On the other side, Leon was straining to crush the nut while his teacher continued to puff on his cigarette. He looked around and told his student, I do not belong in this luxurious place. He gazed at the ceiling, which was intricately and beautifully decorated, with all these glittering and opulent things. Before he could finish speaking, Eren Pendragon approached and called out loudly, Argos Leon, which startled both of them, making them turn around. Then he cheerfully said, we have been granted permission by Prince Ian to tour the training grounds. In a place where a golden lion was courageously roaring, where everyone was training hard those who would become the sword and shield of the Empire. This place is called the Golden Lion Army. Then the four of them went to where everyone was training. Some were practicing with swords while others were training with sticks. Suddenly, Argos burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha, so they have such a nice place here. Then he hugged Leon and said, I will let you play with them for a while, Leon. Seeing his teacher like that, the boy happily replied, yes, sir. The Golden Commander of the Order, Count Granite, with a serious expression, welcomed in. Welcome, Prince Ian. Ian put his hands on his hips and looked at him cheerfully, noticing Eren with Leon and Argos standing behind Ian. The Count, not knowing who they were, asked, who are these people? Ian looked at Eren and introduced, this is the current Baron Pendragon, Eren Pendragon. Eren placed his hand on his chest and politely greeted the Count. And continued, together with his retinue. Argos simply smiled in greeting, while Leon was so nervous that he was sweating all over his face. Ian extended his hand and explained the reason for their visit. They want to participate in training with the Golden Order, so I invited them here. Hearing this, Count Granite responded, I understand. Count Granite respectfully looked at them and smiled deeply, saying, I will treat them wholeheartedly. In the training arena, as they stepped inside, what lay before them were soldiers diligently practicing, undeterred by hardships and difficulties. In the sky, there was even a battalion training on Griffin mounts. Eren looked around while Ian casually put his hands in his pockets, showing little interest in the training. Count Granite walked ahead, calmly leading the two of them on a tour with his eyes closed. As Eren took in the scene before him, he thought, close combat. There were also archers aiming to shoot targets, alongside cavalry wielding spears and gallantly training on horseback. They were not only training on the ground, but also in the sky. Even Eren couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. There was even a battalion riding griffins. Eren pondered, observing the soldiers before him, and couldn't help but praise silently. These soldiers are receiving exceptional training. Ian, standing next to him, just smiled at him. He proudly looked at Eren and asked, what do you think, Eren? The Golden Lion Division is truly the pride of our empire. Count Granite also added proudly, all members come from noble lineages or are knights. We have carefully selected them to turn them into the most elite knights. Ian glanced at Eren and continued, but the knights in front of us are just mediocre. Eren feigned disinterest and continued to focus on the soldiers' training, seemingly ignoring Ian's and Count Granite's words. Somewhere in the training arena, Leon was holding 3 acorns and trying to crush them. Leon spoke up and asked, Sir. Leon looked up at Argos and curiously said, why are you and Mr. Eren just looking around? Hearing Leon's question, Argos simply smiled at him and said, this is quite an interesting place to find an opponent to play with. He closed his eyes and reminded Leon, but don't crush those acorns anymore. Hearing his mentor's reminder, Leon replied blankly, oh yes, sir. Suddenly, something flew by like a bolt of lightning so quickly that Leon couldn't react. A soldier was thrown towards Leon and Argos. Fortunately, they both managed to dodge to the sides. The soldier grimaced in pain on the ground, while Leon stared wide-eyed at the soldier lying there. Someone approached from a distance and apologized, causing the two teachers to look back. He said, sorry, I might have been a bit rude. He politely sheathed his sword and continued, for the new recruits, I might have been a bit harsh. Suddenly he was surprised, his eyes wide open, mouth agape, looking as if he had seen someone familiar. Huh? Leon and Argos looked at him in confusion, not knowing what was wrong with him. He propped his chin with his hand and stepped closer to Leon, gazing intently at him and saying, your face reminds me of someone. His words caused Leon to become so anxious that he broke out in a cold sweat. He continued, his voice growing louder than before. Because your face was so heavily made up before, I almost didn't recognize you. Hearing this, Leon was startled, his face paling. His expression caught Argo's attention. He became excited and said loudly, Leon, you are the eldest son of the John Bolt family named Leon, right? Although it was a question, he was already certain that the boy was indeed Leon. At this moment, Leon was so frightened that he couldn't utter a word. He was sweating all over, panicking, not knowing what to do. The soldiers nearby who were training began to whisper, the John Bolt family, those clowns? He shrugged and looked at you, continuing to mock. I have seen you perform at the royal palace once. He detailed how Liam was performing on stage. You twisted into a ball and rolled around the stage. As he spoke, he couldn't help but laugh loudly to the point of tears. It was truly outstanding. That performance was a masterpiece. Leon felt embarrassed hearing him say that, lowering his head and not saying a word. Argos, standing beside him, also just quietly looked at him. Seeing Leon saying nothing, he became even more excessive, and his words now carried a hint of contempt. He asked him, so what's the reason that the clown from back then has decided to change careers now? You are carrying a sword or spear at all. He made a face that looked very irritating, shouting loudly at Leon, is your trump card throwing daggers? Suddenly, out of nowhere, a nut flew in. He was quick and agile enough to catch the nut coming toward him. It turned out that the one who threw the nut was Argos. He threw the nut because he couldn't stand to hear another word coming from his mouth. Leon turned to look at his teacher with a surprised expression. Argo smiled triumphantly, held out the nuts, looked at him and said, this is it. He opened his hands, looking bewildered. The nut? Argos held the nuts in his hands, looked at him and said, we are fighters and we use this to train our fists to the limit. Argos said this while crushing the nuts in his hands effortlessly, easily enough to crush an opponent's skull. Argos' actions left him momentarily stunned. He continued, so we don't need any useless weapons. Argos gently let the crushed nuts fall. Argos clenched his fists, looked at him and taunted, we can fight anywhere, anytime. Let's see whose fighting style is stronger. His words widened Leon's eyes in surprise. Hearing the challenge, his face began to contort. He clenched the nut in his hand and contemptuously said, those ridiculous nuts, I can do it too. He tried to crush it with one hand, but when that didn't work, he used both hands. Despite putting all his strength into trying to crush it, the nut remained unharmed. Argos looked at him in frustration as he struggled with all his might, while Leon stood by, watching him seriously. After a while, Argos waved his hand and called Leon. Leon. Seeing his teacher calling him, Leon was a bit surprised. Realizing it was time for him to show his skills, Leon seriously held the nut in his hand. He gently crushed the nut with ease. Everyone was amazed to see him crush the nut so easily. Argos placed his hand on his forehead, proud of his student, while he was sweating in fear. Argos smiled smugly at him and said, 3 months, no, 1 month is more than enough for him to defeat you if taught by me. Hearing the provocation, he became furious and rushed towards Argos. He drew his sword while shouting loudly, you bastard. Argos quickly blocked his hand that was about to draw the sword. Argos swiftly raised his hand in front of him. At this moment, he was controlled by Argos and was in a passive position. He looked at him and kindly reminded him, don't be messy, you little bug. At this point, he was so scared that sweat was pouring down like rain. Leon saw how cool his teacher was. His eyes shone with admiration as he stared intently. At that time, Count Granite, along with Ian and Eren, arrived. He shouted angrily, what are you doing? Seeing the Count, the man trembled in fear and stammered. Commander, he flustered and explained, it wasn't me, it was them causing trouble. They dared to disrespect our Golden Lion Brigade. In response to his explanation, Argos calmly replied, your presence here is the real insult to the Golden Lion Brigade. He shouted angrily, intending to charge. You bastard! At that moment, Ian stood silently, clapping his hands and spoke. All right, that's enough. Ian's clapping and smiling made all the soldiers stand still, not daring to move. Ian looked at the crowd and said, what should we do here? It seems none of you are willing to back down. Ian proposed a solution. Then how about the two leaders here face off against each other to see who was right? Ian's statement surprised Eren and Count Granite, causing them to turn and look back. A soldier stammered. Then, with Prince Ian as the witness, he gave the signal. The duel between the captain of the Golden Lion Brigade, Count Granite, and his opponent, the representative of Duke Pendragon, Eren Pendragon. Both sides are ready. The soldier shouted loudly, it will begin right now. The Count said, once the sword is drawn, it doesn't matter whether you are a peasant or a monarch. The only thing that matters is to kill or be killed. With a sharp gaze, the Count affirmed, I will make sure you never forget that. As soon as he entered the stance, his aura erupted. An overwhelming presence spread throughout the training ground. Levan shivered, thinking to himself, he is very strong, even stronger than Morgan. Argos, intrigued, chuckled softly. You noticed that too. He bowed his head and replied, yes. Ian observed carefully, thinking, he must be at least 5 times stronger than me, much more skilled and experienced. He pondered, brother. Ian recalled the scene earlier when he was with his sister and Eren at the castle. Ingrid looked at Eren with fascination. She asked, why do you think Eren has changed so much compared to before? He pondered. Ian continued to wonder, now, what will you do? He stood firm against that overwhelming aura. Eren drew his sword and said, then I will take this seriously too. The Count stepped forward. He thrust a sword sharply ahead. Eren narrowly dodged, thinking to himself, he's too fast. The Count assumed his stance again and continued his thrusting attacks. He attacked continuously and Eren had to dodge with great difficulty. Leon was astonished, thinking, is the young master being pushed back? Argos analyzed, it's not just ordinary agility, it's incredibly fast. The boy stared blankly and said, ha. Ian smirked. He has no preparatory actions or unnecessary movements. It's purely swordsmanship. He understood well that when faced with it directly, it looked no different than a quick thrust. The attack power was immense, but the captain had trained that royal swordsmanship to its ultimate limit. Eren managed to avoid the next blow. This time he spun quickly, forcing the Count to be on guard. But he was caught off guard and was struck on the shoulder. Argos exclaimed in surprise, well done. By closing the distance, he managed to intercept the counterattack. The Count was not to be outdone, quickly swinging his sword. Eren jumped to dodge, then spun in the air and kicked him straight in the face. As soon as Eren touched the ground, he swung his sword, the slash grazing the Count's cheek. He immediately got into position as Eren landed. The two charged at each other instantly. The arena was filled with dust. The soldiers gasped in astonishment. Aen seemed very excited, exclaiming, wow. Leon admired, saying, truly, an amazing match. Argos observed carefully, then commented, as I predicted, that Brat's swordsmanship is exactly like Tiramis. The Count praised, indeed, a unique swordsmanship. He then unleashed his aura again, but emphasized, those tricks are not enough. To defeat royal swordsmanship is not easy. Eren skillfully changed the direction of his sword, escaping from the Count's grip. The Count was astonished and charged forward. Everyone was shocked by this situation. He quickly pulled back. The Count regained his composure and looked at Eren. Leon was filled with question marks, not understanding what had just happened. Argos was intrigued and exclaimed. The Count frowned and asked, what? What just happened? Eren smiled triumphantly and said, the way to hold the sword has changed. Argos commented with interest. It seems that everything will be different from now on. Eren's aura surged powerfully. Eren and the Count faced each other, their auras exploding. The Count tensed and exclaimed, what just happened? The pressure from him suddenly changed. Argos laughed with delight and said, somehow, the situation has changed, hasn't it? Aen was surprised and wondered, just now, could it be? A moment of silence before the clash. Both rushed at each other fiercely. Eren gently pushed the other aside, causing the Count to be knocked down. Without waiting like before, he swung his elbow forcefully into him. This time, the Count fell flat. The Count's soldiers panicked and cried out, Team Captain. The Count hurriedly got up. Eren's aura was indeed powerful. He opened his eyes wide in astonishment, then increased the pressure of his own aura. Argos unexpectedly exclaimed, wow. Levan was surprised. His aura suddenly strengthened. The Count shouted loudly and charged forward. It was the familiar quick stab, but Eren easily blocked it. The crowd was excited. What a fierce attack. Go ahead, Captain. Ian stared wide-eyed, unable to take his eyes off the fight. The Count continued to attack, but he was extremely bewildered. No, is there any chance to hurt him, even just a little? Eren was defending solidly. Aen feared and thought to himself, this feeling is so similar to what I sense with Luce. Argos remarked with interest, that's a technique characteristic of the South, used to transfer force elsewhere. I never expected him to use it this way. Eren fought while recalling the brief time he spent with Isla. He remembered the scenes of them happily training and realized he had learned many techniques. The two swords clashed strongly. The battle continued fiercely. The Count was quite exhausted. Aen noted, he is getting stronger. But upon reflection, he felt something was off, something had changed. Eren glanced over and Aen was startled. He understood the implication and immediately commanded, stop, that's enough. Ian hurriedly stopped them. Both of them had incredible skills. I am very satisfied. Now, quickly gather the swords back. The Count was sweating profusely, astonished. Eren extended his hand and said, I underestimated you. He gasped, regained his composure, and smiled with relief. They shook hands amicably. Argos was proud. Our master is indeed very different. Leon asked, yes, what do you mean? Argos explained, he understands the principles of a duel very well. Aen observed Eren, thinking to himself, He has maintained the captain's pride. He said, "Somehow it feels like you have changed a lot in a different way." Eren replied, "A lot has happened." He continued to make conversation. "After all this, Captain," he expressed his respect. "The strength of the Night Brigade led by you truly impresses me. So I hope you will allow us to stay here for further training." Eren emphasized, especially for Leon, this place will be the most suitable environment for his development. The Count agreed. "I understand now." He ordered you all practice according to their wishes. The soldiers replied, "Yes, Commander." The one who had clashed with them before was red-eyed but could do nothing. Looking into the distance, Eren seemed to hear a voice. "Remember this, our forces will grow stronger than ever. One day we'll charge into the battle awaiting us ahead." At the city gate, the sound of drums echoed. The guards were terrified, and one asked, "Over there is." A luxurious carriage entered, and behind it was one of the most powerful leaders of the Empire, Count Roxon. Next was Count Sarad, who had a very close relationship with the Pendragon family. Not to mention the most prominent trading city of the Empire, the governor of Luce, Count Segonda. The guards were gossiping. This year's title ceremony has many high-ranking officials. The drummers must be exhausted. Then the next sound startled them. Everyone gaped, not just drums, but also trumpets. It must be a duke or someone of higher status arriving. The majestic dragon emblem appeared. The guards gaped in astonishment, staring intently. That was the flag of the Sea Dragon King, the leader of the 5 great dukes, the one who completely rules the south. This character is Duperangus. Eren was still diligently training. He smirked slyly. Carter rushed in and shouting energetically. His opponent was Isla. He effortlessly deflected the blows, dodging skillfully. Carter yelled, "If you're so good, then stop dodging." Isla spun the staff, one end of the weapon blocking under Carter's feet. He knocked the boy down. Carter was annoyed, quickly regaining his balance. He launched a sharp kick. "Take this." Isla was startled and quickly counterattacked. Their match was quite a spectacle. 2 nearby were guessing. "I don't know why, but I feel like he's sulking." He was given another task, so he couldn't go with the Lord. They say it's training, but he's just venting his anger right now. While they were happily chatting, a large log came crashing down, landing right between the 2 small heads. Asla glared angrily. He was the culprit of that failed assassination. He had shattered Carter's weapon and thrown it away. The 2 trembled, exclaiming, "How terrifying." The middle-aged man said, "But they are really impressive, right? They are on another level, so their training methods are also on another level." The mustache man laughed teasingly. "Our knights have leveled up. They are really good. I haven't trained in a long time, so I think I'll go for another round." The red-haired girl mocked, "What do you have the energy for another round?" The middle-aged man was shocked. "Hey, don't tease him." Ron commented, "Since Luz arrived, they have become much stronger." The elder laughed. "Kuhihi, Isla has technique, Carta has strength. It's like they were born to be each other's perfect rivals, right?" He replied, "Absolutely perfect." Ron asked, "Oh, by the way, is there any news yet, Cradle?" He reported, "That mage has infiltrated the territory of the Pendragon family." Hearing this, they were all very surprised. Cradle sat down and drew a diagram. "Last time, he broke through the barrier, so this time I prepared a double trap. That's how I was able to spot him earlier." Ron continued to ask, "You mean the warlock who brainwashed the centaurs, right?" He said, "I don't even know if it's the same person this time." Cradle speculated, "The guy appeared near the tomb. Then a large number of undead showed up in Sisek. Is there a connection between them? What genius mind is behind the assassination of the prince and Duke Engris?" Ron pondered, "There's no way to know what they will do next." He was worried, and there are only 10 days left until the title-granting ceremony. Ludo was restless. Eren. A loud voice called, "Hey, Leon, look, there's Argos too." Eren happily showed off, "Look at this dress of mine. Isn't it beautiful? This is my ceremonial dress. My mother left it for me." He quickly replied, "Wow, it suits you very well, Princess Eren." Argos stopped smoking and asked, "Today is the day of the title-granting ceremony for that brat, right?" Eren smiled and called out, "Come out, Lindsay." The woman behind the door hesitated, but, she encouraged, "Don't be shy. You look great in that outfit." Lindsay finally stepped out. The 2 men were very surprised. The outfit suited Lindsay perfectly. Eren smiled and said, "Now that you are my brother's wife, you must radiate an irresistible charm. Just you, right?" She excitedly ordered, "Now both of you hurry and change into the outfits I personally selected for you." They sighed. "Huh?" Eren said, "Finally, this day has come." Standing beside him was Ian. Ian replied, "Yeah, he was looking forward to it. Just thinking about seeing Eren in the most beautiful outfits made his heart flutter." Ignoring Ian, Eren continued, "The genius mastermind behind the assassination of the Crown Prince will finally reveal himself." His gaze sharpened, right in front of Love Tylene and the Emperor. Aang pouted at the man beside him. He reminded, what I want to say to you is you already have too many enemies. I am warned, there is a high possibility that Sigmunda has set many traps to harm you today. You should be ready. Eren hummed in agreement. I know. At the ceremony, Lindsay looked visibly uncomfortable. Eren was very worried about her. He asked, do you feel uneasy in that outfit? She replied, yes, that's true, but... Lindsay opened up, inside, I feel uncomfortable. I come from a farming background, my hands are full of calluses, and I'm not exactly what you'd call beautiful. Lindsay shrank back and continued, I feel like I don't deserve to be standing here next to Sir Eren. He was very surprised. An instant, Eren recalled the genuine smile of that girl during the hard days of farm work. He said, I feel the same way as you do, Lindsay. She did not understand. 3 flamboyantly dressed women looked down at them. They were gossiping. So that is Eren Pendragon. He is even more handsome than they say. One of them turned and asked, aren't you coming with us, Ingrid? She seemed flustered. No, The woman next to her spoke up, saying, come on, Sylvia, don't bring it up anymore. The girl has been rejected. The other one laughed uproariously. Is that true? Ha ha ha. Ingrid was apprehensive of them. 3 people extended their hands adorned with precious gemstones and said, we are older sisters, so we will let you go first. Now it's our turn as we possess beauty and come from noble lineage. We are the pinnacle among the noble ladies in this kingdom. The princesses of the kingdom, La, followed by Sylvia, and finally Elaine. The 3 of them are in a contest to see who can win the heart of that gentleman. The event was lively. Count Sarah inquired, so how is Luna doing, young Master Pendragon? He replied, she is still very well. The person responsible for our internal management has praised her a lot. He forced a smile. I'm glad to hear she is well, ha ha ha. Then Count Sarah departed. Eren speculated, it seems Count Sarah is trying to arrange a marriage for Sister Luna and my brother. Both Eren and Lindsay were tense. She casually said, I support it. Sister Luna is very beautiful and also intelligent. As a duke, having many wives is only natural. Eren asked, right, Lindsay? She awkwardly agreed, of course. He sighed. Suddenly, a group of men ran by, shouting excitedly, ah ha ha. They cried out. We made eye contact. They touched my hand. I'm so glad I was born for this moment. Argos asked in confusion, what are those fools up to? Leon exclaimed, the 3 ladies were among a group of men. They were being adored. He realized, that's... The princesses walked elegantly. Leon affirmed, that extravagant dress, it can't be wrong, that's... He was sure. Lea, Sylvia, and Elaine, the trio of beauties here. Eren was surprised. So they are Ingrid's sisters? Eren replied, yes, their faces are very similar. Argos said, hey, look. He announced the 3 enchanting peacocks are coming this way. All 3 stopped in a straight line, then together with the same expression. It is truly an honor to meet you, young Master Pendragon. Their gaze was very captivating. Eren felt dejected. So that's it. They are targeting me as well. Lindsay, completely sidelined, accepted her fate with sadness. The 3 were chattering. We heard about Luce's story from Ingrid. They eagerly praised, not only are you handsome, but you are also very skilled with the sword, even surpassing Prince Ian. The 3 were about to elevate him to the skies. You possess everything a gentleman could have. With cheerful expressions, they began to attack, except for a suitable companion. Lindsay went pale knowing they were talking about her. Eren frowned. He narrowed his eyes in annoyance. Elaine laughed and said, Mistress Lindsay, I've heard about you, a former maid of the Pendragon family. 3 faces with the same sneering expression looked truly frightening. She must come from a well-off family, right? Was her father a knight or someone from the royal family? Lindsay was completely outmatched by these people. She stammered, my father. Eren, annoyed, silently cursed. Those guys. Argos and Leon were also getting heated. Lindsay was about to cry. She said, my father. Eren spoke up. Her father is a farmer. Their goal suddenly changed. One person in the group asked, what? You are really a compassionate person, young Master Eren. They started to improvise, but if it's about an ideal companion, isn't that a bit lacking in criteria? That's why she is just a concubine, right? The 3 of them showed off their hands in unison. Please look at them, our fair and unblemished hands. They were proud. We are the embodiment of beauty and noble lineage, worthy to be the true wife of you. Their rambling was interrupted when Eren spoke. Unblemished hands? Really? He continued, so basically you have never farmed the fields to ensure seeds for the next day, or wielded a sword to fight the monsters, or mended clothes for your family and loved ones and cooked for them. The 3 others stared in shock. Eren disdainfully remarked, you have done none of those things, so why are you so proud of it? He turned his gaze towards his wife and said, she has done all that and has always supported me. Looking at her calloused hands, Eren affirmed, even now and forevermore. Lindsay was utterly surprised. Eren took his wife's hand and said, "Let's go, Lindsay." She cried happy tears. Yes, Eren. Eren sighed with relief. Leon looked on in admiration. Argo smiled with satisfaction. The three princesses cried bitterly. The men, filled with heroism, pointed at Eren and shouted loudly, "Hey, how can you talk to them like that?" A noble condemned, "You have gone too far, young Master Pendragon." They became increasingly aggressive. How can a commoner be a mistress? That is simply unimaginable. It is an insult to the dignity of the noble class of the Empire. The fools yelled, "This is nothing less than a betrayal of the Empire." Right. Leon was tense, just as Prince Lan said he has too many enemies, but how can they be so domineering towards? Argo sighed, "Why is every single one of them such a pathetic, noisy fool?" Lindsay felt guilty and apologized. "I'm sorry, Eren." He reassured her. "It's okay. Don't pay attention to them. Let's go." A character appeared, laughing loudly. Everyone. What a lively scene. Everyone froze. The person approached. His presence made everyone look up. The trembling nobleman murmured, that's..." Leon and Argos stared at him in disbelief. Eren seethed, the Sea Dragon King. He was a man of considerable influence, Duparanges. He laughed and said, "We are all under the protection of the Emperor, so..." With a formidable gaze, Duparanges demanded, "Raise your swords." Most were quaking in fear at his authority. Duparanges spoke to the foolish men, "Let him do as he wishes here, so this is not a place for you to interfere." He stepped closer and continued, "Every family in this kingdom is subject to the Emperor's commands. Nobles like you should know your place." They trembled, and everyone quietly left. Eren faced the Duke, his brow furrowed in distaste. The man kept a cheerful smile. Those around them stepped back, some trembling, calling out, "Duke, Arangis." They murmured, "Currently he has entrusted all southern affairs to his eldest son, Arrigo, and hardly shows his face outside. For him, appearing in the capital at this moment, the atmosphere between the two was very tense. The Duke maintained his smiling expression, while Eren was extremely uncomfortable. The man merely frowned slightly before regaining his initial expression. Duke Arangis complimented, "She truly is a charming wife, isn't she, Duke Pendragon?" He turned to Eren and asked, "And this young lady, is she your sister? You both look too much alike." The Duke glanced at the two escorts. Assessment. Just a glance is enough to see they are extremely fierce warriors. Eren remained silent, then bowing to greet, "It is a pleasure to meet you, Duke Arangis." He looked around and bluntly attacked. Those people are really troublesome, only focused on chasing titles. They are no different from the commoners blinded by wealth. The Duke lamented, "I have to endure a lot because of them. Everything in this kingdom is in complete disarray. I also regret the issue of my son." Eren sighed. About the half-orc son wanting to be a pirate, it's a pity that he is an accomplice and has caused many troubles. Dubarangis was stunned. "A pirate? I don't quite understand." He excitedly said, "But a half-orc, that's really a good idea." The Duke squinted and continued, "Having the wisdom of humans and the strength of orcs, if we mix the two races together, we could." His eyes gleamed with ruthlessness. The strongest warrior would appear. Eren showed clear discomfort. He left, rambling. "When I was a young noble, I had no idea how the Empire was being run." The Duke clenched his fist, ambitious. "This should be a place where any race and lineage can stand at the top if they excel beyond others." The man asked, "Do you agree with me?" The wind rustled through the trees. Eren clearly disagreed. He frowned and said, "A society where the best stands at the top, really?" The Duke held his head high, looking up at the statue, an old and rusty sword, affirming, "Impossible to slay a dragon." The Duke bowed and then left. That's all I wanted to say. Everyone stood watching his back gradually fade away. Eren said, "That person is the absolute ruler of the South, Duparanges." Lindsay exclaimed, "He radiates such an impressive aura." Leon informed, "Initially, the Arangis family was rumored to become the kings ruling the entire southern land." He continued, "That means their origins are completely different from the nobles and the subordinates of the first emperor." Leon recounted, "Although I have lived in the palace for a long time, this is the first time I have seen him in person." Eren still kept a sulky expression. One person raised his fist and said, "You can solve everything with this kid." It was Argos. He asserts, when he talks to you, no matter how bloodthirsty I appear, he doesn't react at all. Argos concludes, "So that means he must have gone through countless things and experienced too many battles." Liam complains, "Master, please stop being noisy, at least while we are in the palace." Argos scolds, "You fool, wherever there is martial arts, there is a battlefield." Eren thinks about the crazy bastard. He is the father of that monster, a highly cunning guy, and the one behind the assassination plot against the prince. Moreover, he is the perpetrator behind the downfall of the Vault family, Arangis. He is determined. "Today, I will expose all of his crimes. The banquet is lively. Arangis is pleased, just as I thought. He praises. He is smarter than all the nobles here. Duke Arangis calls to the person beside him, the Lord of Luce, Count Segunda. He bows. Yes, my lord. Count Segunda squints. Since you have left that place, it will be hard for your opposition to that white maga to be discovered. He laughs in satisfaction. Duke Arangis said, due to our ambitions in the future, we have a task to complete today. He swirled the wine glass in his hand and then poured it out. Count Segunda was startled. Duke Arangis predicted, he will disappear along with Love Tylene. He easily shattered the wine glass. Before I have to face the Empire, the glass fell and shattered. King Sea Dragon Arangis was the one who let go, causing the glass to drop. Segunda laughed and said, I will handle that. Right now, we already have assassins everywhere, from the Duke's territory to the very capital of the Empire. He began recounting. Because of that White Worm's actions insisted, that was when Eren and the White Dragon came to cause chaos, sending one person flying away. Along with Alice, it seems the nobility is very dissatisfied with him. Not just those insects from before, but also nobles across the Empire are our allies. The heir of one of the largest territories in the Empire is facing the entire Alice territory, Janie Roxon. Segunda laughed heartily, and even the Bear Duke of the Lindigor family seems to be willing to cooperate with us. Hylong Von Arangis heard this and asked, wow, the Lindigor family. He replied, yes, they don't seem to care much about the heir of the Pendragon family. He remained silent, his face emotionless. Then he smiled and asked, is that so? He turned and said, you always impress me with your connections. Flattered, he laughed nonstop. Ha ha, that white caterpillar is surrounded entirely by enemies throughout the palace. Hylong Von Arangis raised his hand and replied, I really appreciate that, my ally. Segunda also raised his hand and shouted in response, yes, my lord. The two of them clinked their rings together. At the banquet, many nobles gathered. The announcement echoed loudly. It is now time to confer the titles of the Empire. The grand ceremony begins. Please welcome the pride of the Empire, the 5 Grand Dukes. 2 people stood ready at the door. They opened the door, revealing 3 individuals in green cloaks who were the rulers of the southern region. The flag with a green dragon was raised, Hylong Vom Duke Arangis. A man in blue outfit walked in front holding a flag, while 2 other men in blue followed behind. The guests looked at him and murmured, so that's the leader of the 5 Great Dukes, Sea Dragon King. Some of the female guests looked at him with excitement. He is so handsome. With knights standing close beside him, he looks like a king. Following him was the blood of the Empire, blessed by the angels. Tup Lindigor Duchy, a man in a green cloak, walked by, looking very large. The guests were startled upon seeing him. He is so tall, like a bear. Some even wondered, what does it mean to be blessed by the angels? The guest next to them explained, it is said that they have the ability to fulfill wishes. Hearing this, the girl next to her replied, for hundreds of years, they had never failed on the battlefield, and the head of their family lived a very long life. And now it was the one who had led the elite last year, Leon, who walked in with a joyful face. The one who signed a pact with the White Dragon. The flag with the White Dragon was raised. 2 Pendragon walked in wearing a red cloak, with Lindsay, Eren, and Argos following behind him. He walked with a stern face, the light shining down on his face. The female guests were all captivated by him. They whispered to each other, so that's the hero of Luce, Eren Pendragon. He's quite young, isn't he? I heard he's only 17 years old. Hearing such whispers, Segunda felt annoyed and bit her finger. Javi Roxon glanced over and smiled. And finally, the ruler of the Empire, the royal family of Aragon. Everyone seemed to walk normally, but the 3 girls in the middle appeared to be pushed along, their expressions darkening, disappointed. Walking beside Ian Aragon was Ingrid. The 3 girls behind looked tired, their heads bowed down. Next were 3 knights following behind. Eren looked at them and thought, Ian, those 3 at the front, Ingrid, and the others, they all look alike. Suddenly, he opened his eyes wide as if he had seen something. There were still people entering in the hair of Baroness Erlin from Sisek. Hoofly Aragon stepped in alone, his face expressionless, his eyes appearing lifeless. Eren was taken aback when he heard the name Goofly Aragon. It stirred up memories within him. This was the man who would inherit the throne. In his previous life, he had watched this young man walk, filled with worry. Eren thought to himself, if Ian was like fire, then this person was more like water, a calm, still water like a lake. He couldn't discern any expression on his face. Eren wondered to himself, how old is he? He silently guessed 15, 14. The young man walked on in silence, saying nothing. Then suddenly, Hoofly Aragon glanced over. Eren was startled. Then the young man continued walking while Eren watched him leave. And finally, there stood the supreme ruler of the Aragon Empire, the one at the pinnacle of all houses, the King of Kings, His Majesty the Emperor Aragon. The knights entered. They wore solid armor and stood with stately dignity. Eren recognized the leader of the royal knights leading a large escort. He thought, what kind of person is the emperor? Suddenly, he was surprised. An elderly man with a cane entered. There was a long beard. The emperor walked in, wearing the crown on his head, an elderly man's face. He was accompanied by 5 knights, and everyone applauded in welcome. Eren was bewildered. So this is the king of the Aragon kingdom, an old man who looks weak? A person appeared and introduced themselves. God, the heir of the Roxen territory, Jaime Roxen. It is my honor to meet you, your majesty. The king remained silent, saying nothing. Everything around seemed to come to a standstill, with not a sound. Eren looked at the king in confusion. Then worry, he stammered. The heir of the Roxen territory. The knight behind stepped forward and called out, Jaime Roxen. I acknowledge you as the heir of the Roxen family and appoint you as the Earl, the king said. Hearing this, Jaime Roxen stood frozen, puzzled. Eh? The knight continued. The king has declared it so, but Jaime Roxen still seemed confused. Huh? Eh? Finally, he replied. Thank you, your majesty. Eren's group stood below, feeling anxious as well. Then the king said, Mobris Berlin, I appoint you as Baron. Charles Viscount, you are granted the title of Count. Argon Habsburg, The invited guests around looked on in dismay, unsure of what to say. Saguna stood with arms crossed, clicking his tongue. Jaime Roxen glanced over and said, He is just a puppet. Iron Aragon and Ingrid remained silent. Sea Dragon King Arangis watched intently. Eren turned back anxiously and asked, Leon, has he always been like this? He replied, Yeah, for the past few years, the king has been growing weaker. Since then, I haven't heard a word from him. They say it's due to illness and old age, but the truth remains a mystery. Upon hearing these words, Eren fell silent. He frowned, pursing his lips, and thought to himself, the reason for the Vault family's downfall was their disloyalty to the king, but that's a lie. He looked at the king silently hoping. If only he could see through that deceit. If only he could control the tyranny of the nobles. He recalled the scenes of the people forced into hard labor. If only he had the will to do so, then Sissip right now and Alice too. This kingdom has rotted to its core, and it's his fault. Then he remembered his own words. If that's the case, I will fight in place of the king. Eren slowly approached the king. His face was serious. Looking at the king sitting silently in his chair, he thought, but right now, he is merely a figurehead. He paused before the steps. Then he closed his eyes and introduced himself. Eren Pendragon, heir of the Pendragon family, at your service. The king suddenly released his grip from the chair. He lifted himself up, surprising Eren and the knight. The king stood, and the guests were equally astonished. Eren looked on, unable to speak. Suddenly, the king's eyes lit up. A winged tiger appeared behind him. A terrifying aura spread, making Eren feel as if it would overpower him. Eren was taken aback, clenching his teeth tightly. The knight in front screamed upon seeing this. Ian Aragon and Ingrid shouted in fear. The force of the aura was strong enough to make both of them step back, their hair blowing wildly. On Sagunda's side, Jaime Roxen and others also shouted in fear. But only Sea Dragon King Arangis remained still, calm as if nothing had happened. Eren thought to himself, is this the king's aura? He is stronger than Ian. No, at least twice as strong. It is so powerful that it feels like it wants to drown me. I never expected such an aura to emanate from an old man. He gritted his teeth and thought, I will respond with the aura of the white dragon. The king stood tall in front of him. The gentle eyes of the king suddenly appeared, startling Eren. He recalled Elkin Isla's words, don't just fixate on your opponent. You must know how to harmonize but still stand firm. At that time, he had asked, harmonize? Elkin replied, yes, just go with the flow. The king's aura surrounded Eren. The king's aura spun around him, and Eren's aura also began to weave through the king. The leader of the royal knights questioned, what is happening? The aura of his majesty. And Eren? Ian Aragon was also surprised by this scene. The auras of the king and Eren were enveloping each other, slowly harmonizing together. Everyone was astonished, wondering, why are they merging into one? Eren stood face to face with the king. Then the auras of the two disappeared. Sea Dragon King Arangis was so shocked that he didn't know what to say. Hoofly Aragon remained calm, but the person behind him was so anxious that they were sweating profusely. Suddenly, the king spoke. I have been waiting for someone like you. Then the king raised his face and smiled brightly. He called out to Pendragon. At that moment, Eren was still confused. The knight looked at the king. The king sat down in his chair. The knight fell silent, then realized something. He raised his hand and shouted loudly, declaring, Eren Pendragon, I recognize you as the heir of the Pendragon family and grant you the title of Duke. All the guests were surprised, including Eren. Eren was bewildered and silent. The guests were frightened. Some could not believe what they were seeing. They could not believe that the Puppet King still possessed such a powerful aura. Sea Dragon King Aranges bowed his head, smiled, and said, "It seems that a lion, even old, is still a lion." Aron bowed his head and placed his hand on his chest. The knight looked at him with a worried expression. Remembering the earlier scene, that aura did not pose a threat or oppression to him. He merely flowed with it and merged with it. He pursed his lips, thinking, that is not something everyone can do. Aragon let out a sigh of relief and said, "That guy." Ingrid, standing next to him, looked confused. The sea-driving King Aranges watched him step down, thinking to himself, Eren Pendragon is someone we must be cautious of. Segunda looked at him with an angry expression, his neck veins bulging. He gritted his teeth, clenched his fists, so furious that he couldn't say anything. His subordinates, seeing this, quickly called out, "Governor Segunda." He angrily replied, "Enjoy it while you can, you white worm, because after this banquet tonight, your life will come to an end." Eren walked down, and Eren and Lindsay ran to him and began to cry. The banquet had started, and everyone was pairing up to dance. Ingrid approached him, hesitantly asking, "Mr. Eren, would you be willing to be my dance partner?" He looked at her with an annoyed expression, but then said, "It's my pleasure." The other three girls who saw this felt jealous. They clasped their hands together, so furious that tears welled in their eyes. Eren worriedly realized, as he thought, that silence was indeed golden. On the side of Eren and Ian Aragon, they were dancing together happily. Leland was also invited to dance by many girls. Argos, eating while looking around, said, "He is more famous than I thought." Suddenly, Lindsay anxiously approached, calling out, "Mr. Argos." She leaned down shyly and asked, "Sir, could you dance with me?" He exclaimed in panic, "Huh?" She anxiously continued, "Because of this dress, everyone is staring at me." His face showed dissatisfaction, and he seemed unwilling to speak. Then Argos took Lindsay's hand and pulled her away. Lindsay wondered, "Huh? What?" Argos shouted, "Hey, kid." Eren stopped and looked over. He shouted, "You will dance with your lady next." Lindsay was taken aback upon hearing this. He looked towards them and then fell silent. She frantically waved her hands and said, "No, I'm fine. You don't have to leave Miss Ingrid to dance with me." Before she could finish her sentence, Argos had pushed her forward. Lindsay gasped and shouted, "Ah!" That he pointed at Lindsay and said, "You are the wife of this kid, so kid, behave properly." Her face turned bright red. Both Eren and Lindsay were silent. Then he looked at her and smiled. She hesitated, looked up, then raised her hand and asked, "Sir Eren, could you dance with me for a song?" He lowered his head, took Lindsay's hand, and replied, "It is my honor." The two held hands and blended into the music. Argos held a glass of wine and looked at them, appearing reassured. Eren and Ian Aragon turned to look at them and smiled. Leon also turned to look and admired them. Ingrid stood with her head down. The guests from earlier were watching them intently. The two danced beautifully together. Eren's and Lindsay's gazes always locked onto each other. Everyone moved to the music, dancing. Suddenly, someone shouted, "Your Majesty, the Emperor." Eren and Lindsay turned to see where the voice came from. Jaime Roxon stood respectfully before the king. He said, "As someone who has just been recognized as the lord of a large fief and received the title of Count from your Majesty, I, Jaime Roxon, have something to report to your Majesty, as a loyal vassal of the Empire." The knight next to the king remained silent for a moment and then replied, "I allow you to speak." He bowed and continued, "Some lords, serving as the sword and shield of the Empire, have fallen into a difficult situation because of one person." Then Jaime Roxon glanced over and continued, "Count Pendragon." Everyone at the banquet turned their gaze towards Eren. Due to his involvement, Count Brescia and the eldest son of Count Louver from the Alice territory, our friend Lord Morgan has tragically met his end. Morgan's death resulted from the fighting festival, although he had committed many horrendous crimes prior. But as the Emperor's attendant, the only person who can judge and punish his serious offenses is the Emperor. This incident could shake the very foundations of the nobility of the Empire and is a case of unwarranted abuse of power. Everyone who heard this was bewildered, accompanied by some expressions of anger. Jaime Roxon turned back and shouted, "Is it not true, my lords?" Everyone shouted, "Yes, exactly." After that, he continued, "Alongside me, Jaime Roxon and Count Louver, Styx great lords, also support this, not just Count Segunda." He grinned maliciously and added, "But also, Sea Dragon King Dubarangis, all of us demand that punishment must be carried out." After hearing this, some people were startled. Among them was Ian Aragon. He shouted, "What?" Eren's face was angry, but he remained silent. Jaime Roxon knelt down respectfully. "Your Majesty, may you grant us a verdict." Suddenly, those behind also rushed forward, shouting loudly, "Please grant us a verdict, judge us." Ian Aragon clenched his fists in anger, cursing silently. "That bastard Segunda, Not only did the Louvre family manage to garner the support of half the great lords, but they also brought in the Duke Arangis family. And my father has no power at all. He can't say anything about this. If they could turn the tide right here, they could overturn the balance of power in the Empire. I and Aragon looked down, panic-stricken, as if realizing something. No way could they be bringing this issue up right now to place Kufli on the throne. He looked at Eren, not knowing what to say. Angry, he thought, that Eren. His face was displeased mixed with anger. Sea Dragon King Arangis looked at him, smiled, and smugly said, "Now then, what will you do, Duke Pendragon?" The leaders representing the various families were unanimously voting. Let Duke Pendragon be judged. Immediately, the proposal was strongly supported. Yes, that's right. The family heads gradually lost control of their behavior, chanting in unison, causing chaos in front of the king. Please, your majesty, judge him, judge him. In the face of this situation, the king remained silent and said nothing. The second prince, Anne, with a terrified expression, called out loudly, "Eren!" Leland's face gradually changed color after such a fierce vote. Argos clicked his tongue with an expression of indignation. Eren frowned, showing obvious annoyance. Suddenly, Sea Dragon King Arangis spoke up. "What do you intend to do now, Duke Pendragon?" His face clearly showed satisfaction, sneering. The current situation was disadvantageous for Eren. They were determined not to stop and continued to express their demands for a judgment. The Grand Duke of Lindegor Duchy remained silent, his face serious as he slowly observed the current situation. Segunda suddenly shouted, breaking the silence, "This is an insult to the kingdom, or rather, this can be considered treason." Without stopping, he continued, "Your Majesty, I beg you to punish the Pendragon family." Interrupting him, a booming laugh rang out. Ha ha ha. No one else. That laugh belonged to Eren. Ha ha ha. Everyone was stunned, truly unable to understand what he intended to do. Segunda became angry and said, "What do you mean, Duke Pendragon?" In a mocking tone, Eren replied, "What do you mean?" As he spoke, Eren glanced in his direction. "Isn't it obvious? You are the traitor, Segunda." He remained smug, pretending not to understand Eren, and asked again, "What?" Eren quickly responded, "I have evidence." Seeming to anticipate his plan, the old man chuckled smugly, thinking, "Foolish, Love Tylene won't make it. I have arranged for assassins on the way to the capital. You are just digging your own grave." At that moment, a royal knight rushed in, looking frantic, and repeatedly shouted, "Commander! Commander!" The commander asked him, "What is it?" The knight's face clearly showed fear. Looking somewhat pale, he hurriedly replied, "There is a rebel force." The commander could hardly believe his ears and asked again to confirm, "What?" That information seemed to cut through the noisy atmosphere of the hall. Eren and Segunda simultaneously looked towards the royal knight who was reporting. Outside the palace, an aerial battle was taking place. The knight continued, "Griffins cannot stop them. The aerial barrier has never been breached." From the dome of the palace, a giant griffin swooped down. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as a griffin knight burst in, someone riding on its back, speeding toward the hall. A chariot appeared, pulled by 4 magnificent griffins, gradually advancing into the square. Everyone was astonished, unsure of what was happening. What is that?" Segunda was so startled that he almost dropped his jaw, shouting, A chariot." Eren was equally agitated, not taking his eyes off the chariot as he observed it slowly approach. The chariot gradually descended to the ground. Surrounding the chariot was an impressive legion of griffins. Griffins pulling the chariot. Really? The soldiers gradually gathered around the griffin, swinging their swords and shouting, "Damn it, die." A royal knight swung his sword directly at the charioteer. The slash was very sharp, cutting through swiftly. Blood began to ooze out. Carta parried his strike from that knight, his face remaining unchanged. The audience roared, "An orc, it's an orc." This place fell into chaos. Carta said, "Oh, humanity, what a warm welcome you have given me." Carta's face clearly showed delight in stark contrast to the expression of the one who had just taken a slash. He used his other hand to grab the knight's head and said, "Well then, I must return the favor." As he spoke, he swung his hand and threw the knight away, a long scream echoing through the hall. He was hurled toward Duke Lindegor. The Duke caught the knight with one hand. Sea Dragon King thought, "That orc is bigger than usual and much stronger." The guy riding the griffin suddenly jumped down, moving toward Carta. The sound resonated throughout the hall as royal knights rushed in to fight. The griffin rider was none other than Elkin Isla. He glared at the team of royal knights coming toward him, drawing his sword. The speed of his blade was so terrifying that the naked eye could hardly keep up. With just a few simple sword moves, he successfully defeated the entire team of knights charging at him. The sound of swords clattering on the floor shattered the initial atmosphere. The knight commander stood in astonishment. The elite royal knights, the most skilled fighters, had been easily defeated. Arangis could not hide his shock either. He stared intently at Elkin and thought to himself, this skin color and the twin swords. Arangis ran his fingers over his beard, a slight smile spreading across his face. He said, Valva's knight. Immediately, the knight with his face covered behind him responded, his piercing eyes making anyone who met his gaze shudder. Segunda trembled, gradually losing his composure, stuttering, who are they? From the carriage, Mark Killiam stepped down, covering his mouth, speaking as if he was about to vomit. That's why I said, let me go first and explain. Vincent Ron sipped from his glass, saying, they have to bear the name of the incompetent commander, even if they are exemplary knights. Before Segunda now stood a very familiar figure, unable to hide the surprise on his face. He thought, Vincent Ron. Why did he suddenly appear, and why was he accompanied by those subordinates? The feeling of intimidation spread throughout his body. It's over. Vincent and Mark approached to meet the monarch. We apologize for our rudeness, Mark Killiam said in a resonant tone. We are knights of the Duchy of Pendragon, the White Dragon Legion. Today, you must undertake an important mission related to the fate of the kingdom. As he spoke, he suddenly stopped, his face pale, tears welling up in his eyes, and he gasped. He fell to his knees, muttering, I get motion sickness. Those present at the palace couldn't help but wonder. An important mission, the White Dragon Legion. Eren nodded slightly. Eren turned to the White Dragon Legion and said, take the aerial route to avoid ambush. I understand. Eren changed his tone, his expression looking very frightening, standing amidst anger, but still wearing a smile. He said, but you surprised me, Ron. I didn't know you wanted to appear like this. He raised his hand to the shard of glass as the carriage came in and caused a stir. Ron raised both hands as if to express regret. He gave a faint smile and said, we were blocked by the corpse of a Griffin, so we couldn't explain anything. He sipped the drink in his hand and continued, isn't it too dangerous to miss tonight? We did everything to protect you, dear young master. Eren seemed to understand the situation. He paused for a moment, sighed, and gradually overlooked Ron's actions. Laughter echoed from afar. Ha ha, these kids are really interesting, so close-knit, aren't they? Eren and Elkin turned to look in that direction. Master Leon and young Leon approached. He continued, I see that we will get along well, right, Leon? Young Leon seemed to agree with everything his master said, his face beaming as he replied, yes. Mark Killiam looked up and asked Eren, who is he? Eren replied, Leon's master Argos. He is an experienced warrior who has just joined us. He spoke while glancing at the Duke's group, ready to confront those who wish to dominate this kingdom. Arangis seemed to understand that Eren was hinting at him. He smiled faintly. On the side of the Sea Dragon King, there was no hesitation to respond, turning their gaze toward the White Dragon Legion. The Duchy of Pendragon was equally unyielding. The two sides seemed to be locked in a stare, like light and darkness. The atmosphere suddenly became unbearably tense. Elder Segunda was not yet subdued. He shouted loudly, what nonsense are you talking about? He yelled while pointing at the Griffin, nothing more than a farce. Do you all see? They are not only putting on a show, but also causing chaos right in front of the king. He continued to shout, they certainly have intentions of treason. Behind Eren, he merely smirked and interrupted him. Why are you in such a hurry, Segunda? With complete confidence, he continued, I will say it again, the only traitor here is you. Carta immediately chimed in, and here's the evidence. As he spoke, he tossed the man in front of Segunda. Before him now stood a witness in the flesh. He paled, recalling the earlier words, an important mission related to the fate of the kingdom. His eyes widened and his pupils shrank. He gasped in uncontrolled panic. Ah! Eren smiled triumphantly, his expression signaling victory. Segunda, in a state of mental turmoil, muttered, Love Tylene. Segunda now knows fear. He trembles in fits, unable to utter a word. The auditorium collectively asked a question. Who is that old man with white hair? The Sea Dragon King remains silent, watching this exciting play. Eren grabs the old man at his feet, needles, and says, his name is Love Tylene. In the center of the auditorium, he continues, Brescian territory used to hold great power in Sisek. Eren's expression changes, and he angrily says, and this man is one of the culprits behind the assassination of Prince Sion 3 years ago. The second Prince Ian is taken aback. The auditorium once again echoes with the surprise mixed with panic of the guests present. You, what did you say? The commander of the Royal Knights is also stunned by that declaration. The king frowns, still maintaining the silence he has had since entering. Eren raises his hand to his chest and speaks with certainty. I once collaborated with Prince Ian to investigate the truth behind his case. Therefore, we infiltrated Sisek. Love Tylene trembled as he heard Eren present his investigation. Eren continued, and it has been discovered that Love Tylene is the one who poisoned the crown prince. Suddenly, he emphasized his words as if what followed would be an earth-shattering truth. However, he is merely a pawn. The hall was in chaos at the words of Duke Pendragon. People could not understand. Many thoughts were racing in their heads at that moment. Eren continued, the mastermind is someone else. Sagona jolted, his face pale as a ghost. He knew for certain he would meet his end here. He continued, so this person will tell us. The second prince's expression darkened suddenly. Aran just remained silent, waiting for the great play staged by Duke Pendragon regarding the identities of the rebels lurking in this kingdom and the revelation of their crimes. Your Majesty, Eren glanced at the king who was seated. The commander of the knights immediately raised his hand and said, I permit you to speak. Eren pulled the witness toward the king. Everyone here was astonished, truly confused by his actions. The White Dragon Legion seemed to know exactly what their master intended to do. They just silently watched him. At the same time, Segunda was trembling, praying for himself. Upon hearing this, Arangus fell silent. He cast his gaze toward the trembling Segunda. Sea Dragon King Arangus smirked. Was he plotting something? Suddenly, the ring on his finger began to glow. Simultaneously, Segunda's ring also shone brightly. A mysterious purple energy connected the two rings, and Segunda calmed down a bit. Just a few seconds after seeing that mysterious flow, he immediately went insane. Segunda let out ear-piercing screams. He rushed towards Eren, who was standing there out of control. Everyone was in a state of panic without exception. Eren did not understand what was happening and exclaimed, Huh? The bastard Segunda drew a sword from his cloak and darted towards him, moving too quickly. Lindsay panicked, tears welling in her eyes, calling out to him, Lord Eren. Fortunately, he reacted in time, using his elbow to strike the man's hand, causing a sharp sword to fall from his grasp. Segunda's hand was shattered. Eren glared at him. This bastard was not giving up. He opened his mouth wide and charged toward the witness, Love Tylene. From the very beginning, he had targeted this scapegoat. Eren couldn't react to the situation at that moment. The sound of flesh being torn was haunting, and the scene caused the surrounding nobles to shudder. He had bitten through the jugular vein of Love Tylene. Blood from the condemned man's neck flowed continuously, and the hall seemed on the verge of being submerged in blood. The shouts of the guests present created chaos in the area. Eren was overwhelmed. He felt almost paralyzed by the current situation. Elkin and Ron were speechless in the face of Segunda's murderous act. The horror spread throughout the entire auditorium. He quickly ran over and grabbed Segunda by the collar, shouting, No, you bastard. Segunda died shortly after. Eren thought, he is dead now. Suddenly, a series of unusual events flashed through his mind. No, it can't be. How could a guy like Segunda be so fast and strong all of a sudden? What is happening? All the guests present had the same question. Why did Segunda do this? A nobleman then spoke up. In this situation, there is only one answer. Finally, Sea Dragon King Arrangus spoke. It's hard to believe. I never expected it. The one behind the assassination of the Crown Prince is Count Segunda. Eren shuddered, as if he knew clearly that it was him who caused all of this. He cast his sharp eyes towards Duke Arangus, angry, but without any evidence to accuse him. Arangus slightly bowed his head and said, On behalf of the 6 Supreme Lords, I sincerely apologize to you, Duke Pendragon. The scene right now is truly unfavorable for Eren. Perhaps fortune has favored the Sea Dragon King. With a hand placed on his chest and a facade of sorrowful deceit, he continued, As you said, Count Segunda is indeed a traitor. You have exposed his terrible crimes. Truly, a loyal swordsman of the kingdom. Eren was so furious that he trembled. He hated that he couldn't tear this man apart right now. He stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Eren as if he were a saint, his body untainted by the dust of the mortal world. Arangus smirked, sneering at him with a tone full of sarcasm. No denying it. The collective shouts echoed as if they were atop a pinnacle of victory. But in reality, Eren had lost in the very play he had orchestrated. His face turned towards Lord Arangus, filled with resentment. At that moment, hearing Sea Dragon King Arangus speak, the older man with white hair accompanying the brown-haired woman in the black dress witnessed the scene and stood with his arms crossed, smiling with satisfaction as he said, I told you so. Eren really is like that. Meanwhile, the brown-haired woman in the black dress, also standing beside him, joyfully clasped her hands together in praise. Indeed, Duke Arangus has quickly acknowledged his faults, truly admirable. Then on the other side, upon hearing the brown-haired woman in the black dress and her companion, 2 other noblemen present at the party fell silent and exchanged glances towards them. As for Goofly Aragon, seeing this, he still maintained a cold demeanor, his expression utterly indifferent. But following him was a tanned man with blonde hair, who, upon witnessing the scene, couldn't help but be surprised, wide-eyed, and sweating cold beads on his forehead. At the same time, on the other side, There was a bald man dressed in green robes who also witnessed the scene and instinctively frowned, staring intently at the chaotic spot. Turning back to Eren, inside him was Raven, who, upon hearing the words of Sea Dragon, King Arangis, immediately fell into despair, lowered his head to the ground, raised his trembling hands, and said, "No, that's not it." After murmuring to himself to calm down, Raven inside Eren immediately stood up, stamping his foot hard on the ground, creating a loud noise. He couldn't control himself, clenched his fists tightly, angrily raised his face towards Sea Dragon King Arangis, cursing, "Damn it." At that moment, Sea Dragon King Arangis heard this and turned around, confused about what was happening, looking at him. Then, as he suddenly realized that his previous action had been very foolish, Raven inside Eren at that moment felt enlightened worry and sweating, silently staring at the opponent. On the other hand, as soon as he finished his words, Elkin was taken aback by Eren's earlier actions. Another person next to him was Ron, who also looked worried upon seeing the situation. Raven, deep down, suddenly thought to himself, useless, because the evidence had been destroyed. While thinking this, he suddenly turned to glance at Love Tylene, who had met a tragic end lying motionless on the ground in his own pool of blood, with white, unseeing eyes, mouth agape in shock. Casting a look at him, Raven within Eren, then shifted his gaze to the other guests at the party who were cheerfully applauding him. Seeing this, Eren internally continued to think and tell himself, even if I reveal the truth right now, no one will believe me. At this thought, Eren, but internally Raven, stood unsteadily, his head bowed, then desperately grit his teeth and clenched his fists. After witnessing everything, the blonde bearded guard standing next to the king on the raised platform immediately raised his hand to signal and shouted, "The banquet tonight ends here, you may all go." Upon hearing the guard's announcement, everyone, including dukes, ladies, and noble young ladies, put their arms around their friends and walked away. In that crowd, there was also an elderly man with white hair and a woman with brown hair wearing a black dress, who were animatedly chatting with each other while walking out together. Later, inside the mansion where the king's banquet was being held, seeing everyone leave, Sea Dragon King Arangis appeared unfazed, smiling at Eren. However, inside, Raven stood frozen, looking down with his head bowed, then placed his hand on his chest and said goodbye, "Then I will be leaving too." Upon finishing his words, Sea Dragon King Arangis immediately displayed a feigned expression, continued to smile with his eyes closed, placing his hand on his chest and said, "I hope we will meet again someday." Upon hearing his insincere words, Raven inside Eren quietly responded, "Oh, of course, see you." At this point, he paused for a moment, then instantly glared, showing a terrifying and fearful expression, glanced at Sea Dragon King Arangis behind him, and added, in an oppressed, angry tone, "On the battlefield." Seeing this, Sea Dragon King Arangis inadvertently frowned in amusement. His eyes, upon witnessing Eren's scene, immediately sparkled with a bright reddish gold light. Without saying a word, he turned and walked away, accompanied by 3 hooded subordinates dressed in dark blue garments. He left behind Eren inside Raven, who was standing next to the 2 corpses of the 2 people he had just controlled from a distance. When one of the hooded subordinates of Sea Dragon King Arangis passed by Elkin, he glanced back unexpectedly because they were too striking and mysterious. Elkin instinctively frowned, continued to glance at the group that had just walked by, and then he contemplated something. Outside the royal palace, as Sea Dragon King Arangis and his 3 mysterious hooded subordinates stepped out, he walked with his eyes closed, appearing self-satisfied. Then Sea Dragon King Arangis opened his eyes, smiled slightly, and spoke, "It seems your time has come." When my 3 Valvas Knights heard him say that, the 3 hooded subordinates behind him frowned, their eyes filled with joy and cunning. At the same time, inside the palace of the king, Eren was standing with his head bowed, gripping his hands tightly in silence next to the corpse of Sabunda. Behind him were others, Ian Aragon, Elkin Lindsay, and another person. Upon seeing this, they were extremely surprised and worried. The 4 of them split into 2 sides, with Ian Aragon panicking, hesitantly calling out, "Hey, Eren." Then Lindsay next to him also worriedly called out, "Sir Eren." On the other hand, while the 2 were anxious and surprised, the other 2 present, Elkin and the person who had accompanied him earlier, Ron, showed no expression and simply observed in silence. Suddenly, the king sitting on the throne spoke up curiously, "Arangis, huh?" At that moment, upon hearing the king's voice, both Raven within Eren and Ian Aragon standing below were immediately startled and hurriedly turned to glance over. When Raven looked out, he immediately faced the king. While he was still in shock, the bearded blonde guard standing next to the king was also taken aback and quickly turned to glance at the king. Seeing this, the king, with a sullen face and a beard covering his mouth, continued to sit on the throne, hesitantly speaking to Pendragon. As soon as the king finished speaking, a small meeting broke out at a tea table amidst the vast architecture of the royal palace. At that moment, Ian Aragon, who also had a seat there, hesitantly glanced and then began recounting. The monster I fought at Luce, that damned pirate. He is related to Arangis. Upon saying this, he recalled the scene of a terrifying barbaric pirate smiling and pointing his sword at him. Hearing Ian Aragon's words, the bearded blonde guard next to the king unexpectedly hesitated and asked, "So who orchestrated the poisoning of the prince?" At this, the atmosphere among the four of them, including Raven within Eren's body, suddenly became tense. No one said anything. When seeing the three people intently waiting for his answer, Raven in Eren's body chose to remain silent, ignoring the three of them. After a long moment of silence, the king sitting across from him opened his mouth to call out another name, Duke Pendragon. Having said that, he placed one hand on top of the other and set them on the table, his expression serious as he stared intently at Eren, who was still Raven inside. Then he continued, "I appoint you as the governor of Luce and entrust you with the secret order to eliminate the Arangis family." Upon hearing this, both Ian Aragon and the bearded, blonde-haired bodyguard immediately stood up, unexpectedly worried as they turned to look at the king. At that moment, Raven within Eren was also stunned and surprised. He quickly looked up and widened his eyes, remaining silent in shock. After saying this, the king took a gold coin imprinted with a dragon, the symbol of the country, looked at it, and continued. "You will need money to confront a wealthy nation, so I also allow the circulation of Pendragon gold coins." At that moment, witnessing the situation, the blonde bodyguard with a bearded mouth grew worried and panicked, hesitantly speaking up, "Your Majesty, this matter." But before he could finish, he hurriedly interjected, "Fine." After that, towards Raven inside Eren, upon hearing this, he clasped his hands together and placed them on the table, his serious expression asking, "Do you believe what I say?" Upon hearing this, the king, with his hands resting on the table, replied seriously, "Ian told me that you are a trustworthy person." Hearing the king's response, Ian Aragon, sitting beside him, immediately became anxious and began to sweat. Right after he finished speaking, the king asked again, "But what do you think of this kingdom now?" Hearing this, Raven inside Eren, who was holding his hands and sitting opposite him, appeared confused. At that moment, seeing him like this, the king closed his eyes and continued to ask, after seeing Sissa and Alice, "What do you think?" Upon hearing this, Raven inside Eren, sitting across from him, suddenly furrowed his brow, remaining silent and merely staring at him. Seeing that he did not speak, the king, who was now clasping his hands on the table, continued to lose hope, saying, "Now I no longer have real power to govern this kingdom anymore." He then recalled the scene of the arrogant brown-haired nobleman attending the banquet earlier, continuing to speak, to the point where he cannot stop the corrupt nobles, or oppose the Dark King Arangis. At this moment, the terrifying image of the Sea Dragon King Arangis staring intently, silently threatening him, reappeared in the king's mind. After that, when he clearly explained the reason to Eren about Raven, the king's hands on the table suddenly clenched into fists, tightening and shaking continuously. Seeing this, Eren frowned and narrowed his eyes. At the same time, seated on another side of the king, Ian Aragon also noticed this and immediately showed concern, calling out, "Your Majesty." Returning to the king after finishing his words, he continued to reminisce about the earlier events at the banquet, recounting, "During the coronation ceremony, I unleashed all the royal aura I possessed, yet you still." At this point, the image of Eren appeared in the king's mind, but inside it was Raven, who had shown no sign of fear towards his royal aura, calmly accepting it with closed eyes. Recalling this, he continued, or conflict with it. Returning to the table where the four people sat, the king clasped his hands together on the surface of the table and continued, "And yet it harmonizes with my essence." Having recounted everything up to this point, the king's eyes reveal a hint of sadness as he spoke. "Even the two of you here, or my son, cannot do that." With that, the king slammed his hands down on the table, bowed his head, and called out, "Eren Pendragon, and I entrust the future of the kingdom to both of you." At this moment, Eren, who was actually Raven, sat with his arms crossed across from the king, closing his eyes as if contemplating something. Then, Eren, who was actually Raven, rose from his chair and moved to kneel before the king, bowing his head to show respect, saying, "I humbly obey, your majesty." After that, day by day, until the next morning at the royal castle's mansion. At this time, a bald man draped in green garments stood on the rooftop of the balcony, silently gazing at the sunrise. Then at that moment in his heart, he silently pondered, "Have you considered shaking hands with that man?" Thinking this, the bald man draped in green robes closed his eyes, raised his eyebrows, and sighed. Then he stood there watching the sunrise while continuing to talk to himself. "Sea Dragon King, don't expect anything from me and Segunda. Since I met him, I've already known. But didn't you say you wouldn't come?" Upon saying this, a bald man in green robes turned to glance. Just as he finished speaking, a whirlwind of strong winds suddenly appeared on the rooftop of the castle where he was standing. At that moment, before he could react, he had to cover his face with his hand to shield himself from the dust. Then, as the storm gradually passed, beautiful white feathered leaves revealed themselves, and soon after, a figure with white angel wings appeared. Seeing this, the bald man in green robes spoke up, looking at the smiling angel who was shrouded, calling her name, Goddess Ayana a Envoy. Then he continued to say, Archangel, as he looked at the angel's unblemished face, her white hair, and emerald green eyes. At that moment, upon seeing him, the angel continued to smile and spoke, Seal. At this time, he turned around with a sharp gaze and asked, You said you wouldn't come, didn't you? The messenger of the goddess, Ileana, politely bowed, while the one who had just asked was the Archangel Seal. Seeing him, the messenger of the goddess, Ileana, smiled gently. Then he approached Seal, walking with a hint of conversation. I intended to, however, something interesting has occurred. Upon hearing this, Seal was very surprised and confused. On the Lobstan plain, Soldrake and the Black Dragon encountered each other, he narrated. Then he continued, This situation made me wonder why they met, especially since that place isn't even under their dominion. Upon hearing this, Seal seemed to understand and immediately asked, So what you mean is there must be something there, right? Upon hearing this, he stroked his chin and raised his head, stating, I'm not so sure anymore, however, dragons are known to be extremely territorial creatures. For them to gather in one place like this, it suggests that something must have happened. Then he gently placed his hand behind his back and said, And matters of this magnitude. Hearing that, Seal immediately asked, Perhaps it is related to the aura of the reigning emperor? Upon hearing this, the envoy could only silently gaze up at the high sky. Someone is crying out loud, the aura of the Aragon family, especially that of the emperor. It was originally a divine blessing bestowed personally by the goddess Ileana, and it is meant to maintain the balance of the human world. Then Seal replied, But considering the current situation, it is on the verge of collapse. It is due to the assassination plot against Prince Cyan. On the other side, Ian was melancholic, regretfully recounting, The aura that our family possesses has been weakening with each generation. He looked sorrowful and pained like a child, then said, Father should have abdicated long ago and entrusted the throne to my brother Cyan. However, due to this incident, he has been unable to do so, even though he is already of advanced age and his body has become like that. Seeing this, Eren Pendragon asked, How old is the Emperor now? As of this year, he is only 55. Upon hearing this, Eren was extremely surprised and astonished. He could not believe that he was 55 years old. Returning to Seal, he said, Among the princes, the one with the strongest aura is the second Prince Anne. Hearing this, the envoy counted on his fingers and replied indifferently. He is still too immature. It's too early for him to inherit the throne. And although Hufli's aura is currently growing exponentially in strength, he recalled that boy, a young man with a long mushroom-shaped haircut and his determined gaze. He said, Soon it's very likely that his aura will be stronger than Ian's. On the other side, Ian glanced over and said, I have listened to you and investigated Gufle, but he is just an ordinary kid, except for the fact that the atmosphere around him is always somber. Eren Pendragon, hearing this, propped his chin on his hand and calmly asked, Is that so? Then, with a face full of anger, he thought about the past and said, But in my previous life, the one who was the heir to the throne was none other than Gufle. Suddenly realizing something, he exclaimed, I understand now. At that moment, the envoy leaned on the platform, looked up at the sky, and called out, Gufli, Jan, Arangis, and the Pendragon family. They will be the ones to carry the future of the Empire, and they may also be the ones who will challenge the logic of this world. Seeing this, Seal hesitated and asked, Is that a prophecy? Upon noticing, the messenger glanced and said, It's just a hunch. Standing before the brilliantly setting sun, he said, Because I feel like the karma of this world is being disturbed by a powerful force. At the training ground, the challenger Liam suddenly shouted, Ah! and rushed in. But Liam quickly dodged. Then, like a rocket, he ran away with an O as if to disdain his enemy. The other one, now acting like a madman, charged in shouting loudly, Ha! Liam jumped onto his sword, bringing them face to face. He suddenly looked scared and asked, Eh? Seizing the opportunity, Liam kicked him in the face, sending him flying, blood spitting out. Seeing this, the Count immediately intervened. Enough, the outcome is decided. Then she raised her hand and called out Liam. At this moment, Liam was as joyful as a child. Seeing this, everyone around was unexpectedly impressed. What a miracle. He has developed so quickly. The other person calmly replied, he has exceeded my expectations. Then they looked at Liam's teacher and saw him holding up a sign praising the student. They said, Your teacher is truly talented. It's all thanks to him. Seeing this, someone else, though frightened, arrogantly said, That's right. It's the captain. The fact that our army is growing stronger is all good, but it's not a bad thing. Then he burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. In the afternoon, everyone stood facing each other. Eren Pendragon looked up at the sky and calmly replied, "You have taken care of us a lot during this time, Captain Granite." Seeing that, Granite cheerfully responded, "We are also very grateful. That process was a great stimulation." Then he raised his hand in praise, although it was quite easy with those two. Hearing this, Eren Pendragon sighed and said, "Captain." Then with a serious expression, he asked, "Do you know anything about the Demon Legion?" Upon hearing this, he was startled and replied, "Of course, that is a team mainly composed of criminals. Sometimes I wonder why they are still part of the Imperial Army." Eren then asked, "So where are they now?" "They are currently in the south, more specifically in the Forest of Ancient Trees. They are subduing a monster called the Beast King." Seeing this, Eren Pendragon frowned, thinking, the Beast King is that troll leader, right? A massive, gigantic green monster. Does this mean history hasn't changed? He silently wondered. Then he continued to stroke his chin, even as Grantine looked on. He lost himself in his emotions, contemplating whether to say, Baal is the one behind the Sisek incident, isn't he? And that caused them to eliminate him. But really, can the Empire kill that cunning old fox? Even if they expelled him from the Legion, wouldn't it be even harder to keep track of him? Countless questions swirled in Eren Pendragon's mind. Seeing him like this, the Count hurriedly called out, "To Pendragon." Hearing this, he quickly denied, "No, it's nothing." And then the farewell images of the two princesses played out. They were cheerful, while Eren Pendragon pondered, "It seems we will meet again, Baltai and Tolio." Finally, Arangis. Rising high into the sky, he resolutely declared, "I am certain I will personally kill all of you." At a magnificent castle, Eren Pendragon was adjusting his sleeves when he glanced over and asked, "Saul, you still haven't returned?" Tada stuttered as she explained, "Yes, that's because of the enormous amount of mana." Kazel also responded, "And the monsters can sense it when they're nearby." Hearing that, Eren simply said, "Is that so?" This left the girl beside him uncertain of what to say. Suddenly, Lindsay nudged him to sit down in a chair. She reassured him, "It will be fine. Being pushed down surprised you a lot. I'm sure if Soldrake is eager to meet you, Eren, as soon as possible. Just see if she has something urgent to attend to. She will come back right away." Then she took a comb to brush Eren Pendragon's hair. Upon seeing this, he glanced back and enjoyed the moment. Unexpectedly, he said, "Thank you, Lindsay." Lindsay blushed while brushing his hair. Witnessing the scene, Tada suddenly exclaimed, "Couple." Kazel could only respond with "Fu-fu-fu." Suddenly, someone pushed the door open and called out, "Brother." Eren was quite surprised to hear the call. Eren Pendragon's younger sister, happily said, "Your farewell ceremony just began." Melvin wiped his nose with his hand and cried out loud, "Our master, Duke Pendragon, has been appointed as the governor of Luce." Then he took Lindsay's hand, and the young couple shyly walked in under the cheers and applause of the crowd. One person in the crowd said, "I feel very happy for you." On one side was Liam cheering for his teacher, who was drinking with Karda. On the other side was Elkin Isla, who was attentively taking care of the little girl Maya. The young couple was happily together, with Lindsay joyfully laughing, while Eren Pendragon looked kindly at the girl next to him. Suddenly, Helene walked over and called, Hey, Eren." Hearing the call, Eren turned around. She leaned in to whisper in her ear, "Those two." Then she looked over at Eren Pendragon, who was chatting and laughing with Lindsay, and said, "They have become much closer, haven't they?" Seeing this, Eren happily covered her mouth and replied, "Yes, they have been through a lot together." Noticing Luna Sarid standing there shyly, Ron gently walked over to her and asked, "Are you enjoying being alone, Miss Stayrod?" Upon seeing him approach, Miss Luna said, "Ron." Hearing her call him, he smiled brightly and said, "Here," and offered her the beer glass in his hand. "Let's have a drink." In response to that enthusiasm was a blunt refusal. "No, not me." Seemingly understanding what she was thinking, Ron gently said, "The Duke has scheduled to arrive in Luce tomorrow. If you have anything to say, make sure to say it today." Then he raised his beer glass in front of Luna, even though she was trying to suppress her emotions. Taking the beer glass in her hand, she felt a surge of confidence and quickly drank it all in one go. Then she placed the empty beer glass on the table. With a serious attitude, she looked straight at Eren. Suddenly, she called out, "To Pendragon." The call surprised Eren, who turned to look. Then she walked over, standing in front of him, face to face. Seeing her, he asked in shock, "Miss Stayrod." Hearing him call, she fell silent, gathering all her courage. Then she smiled softly, gently lifted her dress, and bowed. "I am very pleased to know that you will be appointed as the governor of Luce." She lowered her head, not looking at him, but he could still see her embarrassment. Then she took her dress and walked away without saying anything more. Ron saw this from afar and didn't know what to say. Holding a beer glass in his hand, he spun around and sighed. She still hesitates. On another side, someone was drunk and talking nonsense. "We've just begun, bring out more beer." Carta gave the order and someone poured beer, a fine quality beer. Holding the beer bottle in his hand and admiring it, Ron praised, "The beer from this territory has become even better with each sip." Holding a glass of wine, Eren pondered. Then he said, "The soldiers also really like it." Looking straight at the person opposite him, Eren seriously said, "I will trust you with this territory, Eon. As long as you are here, I can feel assured to set off for Luce." Hearing this, Ron shook his beer glass, looked at it, and said, "But that will be impossible without their help in reducing this burden." Upon hearing this, Eren was utterly confused and raised a question. Then Ron told him, "Under the management of Steward Melbourne, most matters are running smoothly, especially those assigned to Miss Sarah. Regarding the development of the York Immigration City, it is still progressing favorably." Hearing Ron talk about the tasks of those who work in the house, Eren could only bow his head in contemplation. Suddenly, Ron asked, "What do you think, Pendragon?" Then he placed the wine glass on the table and asked, "Isn't it time for you to consider an engagement with Miss Sarah?" At this, Eren jolted and was taken aback. Ron then continued, "Compared to young ladies from the capital and other nobles who only care about looking good and pursue nothing else, Sarah is different. She's a talented young lady." Then he looked directly at Eren and seriously said, "She could be a valuable assistant for you. And if you compare her to Miss Lindsay." At this, Eren became gloomy and pondered. Remembering Saron's image, he frowned. Now one was bowing his head and the other was calmly looking straight at him. Seeing this, Ron continued pouring beer and said, "If you don't like her, then we can't force you." To this, Eren countered, "It's not like that." Then he sadly said, "But I." Hearing Ron hesitate, Luna was very curious, staring straight into her beer glass. On the other side, under the night sky, Lady Luna was quietly admiring the moon. Suddenly, she heard a voice calling Luna, which startled her. It was Eren, approaching with a beer glass in hand. Seeing him, she hesitantly asked, "Ren?" Then he responded with a cheerfully lifted a beer bottle and suggested, "Shall we drink together for a while?" At that proposal, she was taken aback. He then poured her a glass of beer. Under the night sky, with the moon shimmering, the two were sitting together, pouring beer. Ron kept complimenting her contributions to the Empire. "I really appreciate that." Hearing his praise, she shyly replied that. Then they clinked glasses and drank together. Noticing her reaction, he complimented, "You changed a lot since the first time we met, haven't you?" That remark made the girl close her eyes and shyly say, "You're still not any different, my lord." At this, he was startled and surprised. She continued gently, "To be honest, I never liked you, especially you before the deep coma." Luna softly added, "But after you woke up, you seemed to have become a different person, a strong person. That's when I started to take notice of you." Then the girl shyly covered her face and smiled softly. "Sounds a bit too proud, doesn't it?" Hearing this, he sighed and replied, "True." Suddenly, she stood up, walked to the railing, looked out the window, and continued, "Then, after returning from Sissis, we saw you change, and it seems you have found a purpose in life once again. It's because of this very reason that I want to change too." She turned back to look at him seriously, saying, "I abandoned the political marriage that my family pursues, regardless of the imposed rules." And, hearing this, Eren pondered, "Imposed rules, ha?" She continued, "And I am determined to no longer live for anyone else, but only for myself." Upon hearing this, he was thoughtful, reflecting on her words. Suddenly, she asked, "Do you remember what you said while at the Arad territory?" At that time, he had said, "I want to live to see the subjects of this empire thrive and be prosperous." She smiled gently and continued, "Your words back then quickly became a reality. The lives of the subjects are now prosperous and abundant. That is why I respect you both as a true man and as a ruler, guiding your subjects forward." Hearing this, he was startled by what he had just heard. She firmly said, "So whether you like it or not, I will still become your source of strength." At this point, its face darkened and he looked down. He hesitated to ask, "To you? To you really?" He kept hesitating, struggling to speak, causing Eren to look at him in confusion. Then he bit his lip and fell silent. At this moment, it felt like his image was a reflection of the past. He asked, "Really?" Suddenly, his past memories came flooding back. The image of a brave young man fighting fiercely against Carta to the point of exhaustion, standing in pools of blood. In the end, he explained, "To love one me who must not only love Eren, but also love me, right?" The image of his face, struggling to say those words, was etched in the beer glass. Seeing him in difficulty, she looked down, and the scene now felt so empty, so incomprehensible. Hearing this, she unconsciously asked, "Eren, what are you thinking about?" Seeing this, he still bravely avoided the question. "It's nothing." Then in one gulp, he finished the beer in his glass. He smiled like a child and said, "Thank you, Luna." He looked at Luna, making her feel shy all of a sudden. She shyly smiled and then looked at him with gentle eyes. Then she broke the awkward atmosphere with the words, "It is my honor." Unconsciously, he thought, for now, this is enough. On the sea now appeared two boats, one black and one white. The black ship, with a pirate flag, immediately attacked the other boat. It made everyone panic, shouting, "Yuwa, it's pirates!" They swung across the ropes to attack. They exerted themselves to harm the people, making everyone scream in pain. Ah, ha. At that moment, someone was crying and pleading, "Navy Empire, please save us." Then he ran, but was struck across the back with a sword, causing him to collapse. Seeing this, the pirate sneered, "No one will save you, pig." He smugly continued, "I am the hunter, ruling these waters, ha ha ha." Suddenly, his gaze collided with something. It was a piece of paper that read, "Duke Pendragon. Duke Pendragon has firmly secured the seat of power in Luce." He picked up the paper and asked, what's this? This guy seems to be doing quite well lately, huh?" Before long, he took the paper with his sword and said, "I will settle my debts with you soon, albino worm. At a magnificent harbor, the villa of Segunda." At this moment, Eren walked in, worried, and asked, "What's wrong with you guys?" Elk and Isla and the others were happily trying on outfits looking at him. Then they eagerly asked, "So, what do you think, big brother, about the new sailor uniforms of the White Dragon team?" She shyly explained, "It's because today you will meet the guard of Luce, the commander of the Imperial Navy." At this time, there were several people on the ship swinging on ropes. Marcus Aurelian, a man whose eyes sparkled with electricity. With just one swift sword move, he shattered everything around him, causing Eren to collapse. Then he turned and said, "Next, he is the Admiral of the Imperial Navy, Marquis Aurelian." Seeing a troop approaching, everyone cautiously said, "Look, that's a flag with a blue seahorse and two crossed swords behind it." Then they exclaimed in panic, "The White Shark of Yule, the Imperial Navy commander, Lord Aurelian." When they saw him sitting on his horse, everyone said, "His face looks angrier than before, surely because he is preparing to meet the Duke Eren Pendragon, and because the previous governor had colluded with the pirates and betrayed the navy. Surely he must be tossing and turning, thinking about who will take action. If the governor's weakness is exposed, the White Shark will gain an advantage." The people speculated. He must be thinking about that. At the magnificent castle, Eren and everyone else stood to welcome him. Both sides were now facing each other. Eren gently said, "I, Eren Pendragon, will take on the position of governor of Luce." Hearing this, his expression remained cold. Seeing that, someone on the other side replied, "This is the Sword Emperor, the Admiral of the Imperial Navy, Lord Moraine." Then he looked at Eren and said, "It would be better if you remember this." In response, Eren politely replied, "I have heard that after Segunda's death, Luce was taken over by you, so I would like to hear about the current situation." Hearing that, the other side replied, "We have negotiated with the majority of Segunda's allies." Then, upon hearing this, Elk and Isla called out, "Hey." He said, "Governor, I'm not talking to you." Upon hearing this, the other side gave an unhappy look. Elkin then got angry, creating a mysterious purple haze. Seeing this, Eren called out, "Hey." Count Moraine smiled. Then he said, "I apologize for this rudeness, Mr. Pendragon." The person beside him was also quite surprised. The Count explained, "But being a soldier, my habit is to evaluate a man with my own eyes." Seeing this, Eren asked, "So, what do you want?" Hearing that, he picked up the sword beside him and said, "I simply want to duel with you." Eren looked at him judgmentally. Then he added, "I am a friend of your father, Duke Gordon, so I have heard a lot about you. You are a wheat person, fond of flowers, and immersed in painting. And there are also rumors that you fought against the captain of the Imperial Knights. Granted, my rival. It's hard to believe." He smiled faintly and continued, "So I want to check on you personally." Eren calmly replied, "I understand. Then let's get started." He waved his hand to signal. Seeing him like that, he smiled slightly and walked away. But immediately he was stopped by Elkin. Puzzled, he snorted. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his chin, surprising him and forcing him down to the ground. It was Eren, who had now subdued him. His bodyguard anxiously ran over to ask, "What are you doing, you bastard?" He intended to draw his sword, but was blocked by Elkin. Everyone around Count Moraine was terrified. With a knife pressed to his throat, he tremblingly said, "You cowards!" Elkin angrily shouted, "You're a despicable pirate." His face was contorted in fear. At that moment, Eren pressed down on him and asked, "Does such a thing exist? Who do you think we are facing?" He stammered, "They are the most brutal pirates of the ocean, led by the dark dwarf Lord Orc-Lachuan Tolio Oranges, and clearly he is stronger than both of you." Eren looked at him and said, "I understand." Seeing this, he cautiously lay down without knowing what to say. Eren stood up, pointed at him, and said, "I don't have time to shake hands with weaklings like you." Hearing this, his subordinates were extremely frightened and felt humiliated. He slowly stood up and said, "As you have said, you have conquered me. Governor Pendragon." He looked at Eren, smiled, and said, "It is my honor." Elkin was very surprised to hear this. Eren seriously said, "To defeat the pirates, the strength of the Navy is essential, so I want your support." Under the flickering sunlight, Eren extended his hand in front of Lord Moraine. Then they both shook hands happily. Moraine cheerfully said, "It is my honor." On the large ship, suddenly there was a loud and panicked scream, a terrified shout. "There are pirates." Seeing this, the pirate laughed triumphantly and said, "Ha ha ha ha, let's kill them. Those stupid pigs from the Empire." Suddenly, a noise made him turn around to see what was happening. Another large ship was boldly advancing, a yellow flag with the image of a fierce lion. Seeing that ship, the helmsman suddenly laughed heartily. "The navy of the Empire has arrived." Seeing this, the pirates shouted, "Those filthy humans think they can oppose us?" As time went on, that ship drew closer, releasing Griffin knights who charged forward. Noticing something coming down from the sky, they looked up. And then Elkin, the leading Griffin knight, angrily charged in. Standing high in the sky, Elkin and his companions drew their bows and arrows, annihilating the pirates. Seeing them approach, the pirates recognized them as Griffin knights. Then Elkin unexpectedly shot sharp arrows at them, causing them to scream in pain. Arr! Like a wolf, Elkin rushed in like the wind, using his weapon to strike down each one. Pools of blood rose up, droplets splattering onto Elkin's face. In a normal restaurant, there was a sign shaped like a dolphin with a scar. Suddenly, a voice asked, "What does this mean?" An old man was puffing on a cigar, feeling dejected, and said, "My place is just an ordinary shop." Then he looked at Moraine and his guard and sarcastically remarked, "So it's only natural that there are a few pirates mixed in with the customers, right? But there are some things I don't know much about." Unable to keep his composure any longer, Lord Moraine drew his sword to threaten him. The sharp blade pressed close to the man's face frightened him. He stammered, What are you doing?" Then he turned to the guard beside him and called out, "Isaac." Hearing this, the guard produced a paper with a prominent fingerprint on it and said, "This document has your fingerprint, and clearly you bribed Count Secunda to smuggle goods here. Should I take a few of your fingers? You won't get away with your actions." Lord Moraine angrily stated, "Then should we make an example for others?" With a knife in his throat, the man trembled in fear. In the end, he was arrested. From a distance, Eren witnessed this and turned to look. He watched intently as everything unfolded, recalling Ron's words. Along with the intelligence from the Count's aide, Vincent Ron, "We have captured nearly all the businesses linked to the pirates. If we can eliminate them from loose, we will succeed in cutting off the funding for the Dark Emperor, Tolio Argonis." Eren thought to himself. Seeing this, Moraine crossed his arms, looked at the captured man, and said, "In the Empire, there is no place for mercy towards those who cooperate with pirates. According to the new government's policy, all activities from the mainland to the islands related to piracy have been eradicated. Therefore, it shifted their focus to the small islands in the Milade Sea, where naval forces were very thin. But when the red flag of the White Dragon Army fluttered, they started in fear. It was the White Dragon Army. Carta, furious, leaped towards them on a rope. Soon after, blood splattered everywhere. Given the countless victories of the White Dragon Army and the Imperial Navy, the disappearance of the pirates was only a matter of time. At this moment, Melvin clapped in praise. "The young master has not disappointed us." Ha ha ha. But Ron remained calm, raising his beer glass to drink. Next to him, a small hand was carefully drawing the image of 3 boats and taking notes. It was Luna Sarad, who was intently jotting down notes. As she wrote, she silently praised in her heart, "You did it, Eren." She remembered the night they sat drinking beer together and thought to herself, "I have no choice but to do my best to assist you." She organized her papers and then announced, "The next business deal is with a merchant." Suddenly, she startled when she saw a paper titled Joseph Breeden Trade Exchange. Uneasily, she murmured, "Joseph Breeden? The chief knight of the Sarah district in the past? Is he the polite young man standing by the window greeting me, or the brave one who was beaten to the point of losing his arm?" All the memories flooded back, making her anxious as she thought, "It seems to be that Breeden." In a lavish and magnificent place, someone approached standing before Luna and said, "It's been a while, Miss Luna." Hearing that, she slowly looked up. Upon seeing the person, she replied, "You changed a lot." Breeden, right? Breeden was a fair-skinned young man with a prominent nose standing in front of her. He politely took off his hat and cheerfully introduced himself. "I started my own trading company, thanks to my connections." Then he suddenly burst into an awkward laugh, "Because now I can no longer become a knight with an arm like this." Seeing this, she immediately asked, "So why are you here?" He clarified, "I've heard that this city has no discrimination. A city where everyone is welcome, regardless of their race or nationality. That's why I came here to expand my business." Upon hearing this, Luna asked, "In the very city where the person who severed your arm governs?" His face became sad, and he recalled how arrogant and brave he used to be. Then Luna continued, I can't believe you, and that's why I can't allow it. Hearing this, he put his hat back on and slowly said, You changed. Adjusting his hat, he remarked, You no longer see anything other than Eren Pendragon. Hearing that, she hesitated to ask, Then why? He was determined to shout back, I will defeat him, that Eren Pendragon. Luna asked in confusion, Huh? He placed his hand over his chest and promised, I will bring you more benefits than anything he can offer. Then he calmed down, adjusted his cap, and said, That's why I can't turn back now, at least not at this moment. With a heavy gaze, he looked at her longingly and said, Because I still. Luna was startled, speechless, not knowing what to say. The sky was blue, and the boat had docked. The hideout of the pirates, a group of pirates, appeared. He was the notorious Red Skull, Captain Griezmann. With a sharp gaze, he asked, What brings you here? The Dark King Tolio. Seeing this, Tolio smiled smugly and said, I just came to check on you since I've heard you've been facing quite a big trouble lately. It's because of the new ruler of loose hunting pirates, isn't it? Tolio asked with satisfaction. This made Griezmann's bodyguard angry, ready to charge, but he signaled him to stop. Saying that, he frighteningly remarked, I don't want to hear such words from a guy. Then he mocked Tolio's past, who lost a hand and an eye while fighting that punk. Hearing this, Tolio still pretended to ignore it, not comprehending what was happening. He continued, You've weakened a lot, haven't you? It's all because of the new policies of that ruler, including your main source of income, isn't it? He asked about the ground trading. Hearing this, Tolio silently picked up the fish and said, It seems like you're not doing much better than me. Then he stuffed the fish into his frightening mouth and smugly remarked, Because now you have to tighten your tiny budget. Proof of that is the trash you're eating every day. Upon hearing this, he angrily slammed a hand down on the table and yelled, What brings you here, you miserable ore trader? Then he swallowed the fish and calmly said, I've found a big investor, so there's no way I'm going bankrupt. Then he snapped his fingers and said, However, since this is a common crisis for pirates, why don't we join forces for a while? Then he burst out laughing like a madman. Let's boost our manpower. What do you think? Hearing that, Griezmann closed his eyes calmly and said, Not a bad idea, but there is a small problem. He was startled and asked, What is it? Griezmann continued, We need to decide who will be the new leader. Hearing this, he marveled like a child, then with a disdainful look asked, So how do you want to solve it?